It's Halloween, and this year I'm going to be doing a creature feature. Today we are going to see which final mono poison type is best for a solo playthrough in Pokemon Yellow. I fear doing these three for Halloween was very fitting. After all, Arbok is a terrifying snake. There are horror movies about snakes like Anaconda, for example. Actually, is that a horror movie? I've never seen it. I assume that it is a horror movie. Moving on, there are also movies like The Blob, which is basically what Muck is. And then Weezing is basically the Pokemon embodiment of psychological torture. Look at this thing. He's stuck with a guy that he really dislikes, and he has an awful name, and he's a terrible type. Plus, he doesn't get body slam. Yeah, this guy's really sad. To figure out which one of these Pokemon is the best for a solo playthrough, I'm going to be using my rules, which are in the description. If you are new to my content, please check them out so you know why I'm making certain choices. Now, let's do a breakdown of how these three stack up against each other as Pokemon in Generation 1. Weezing has a base stat total of 420, which is really funny when you think about it. That is when its special is a combined stat, by the way. In modern generations, its base stat total is 490. Arbok doesn't stack up particularly well against it, with only 359 in its base stat total. However, it does have a nice defense stat. These two Pokemon really hit it out of the park with the numerology. Finally, Muck has a base stat total of 400, which is lower than Weezing's. However, I think that it is slightly better distributed. So let's talk about the exact stats that all of these Pokemon have. Weezing has 65 HP, 90 attack, 120 defense, 85 special, and 60 speed. Because crit rate is determined by the Pokemon's base speed in Generation 1, Weezing has a roughly 12% chance to score a critical hit. Arbok's stats are overall lower. The only one that is higher than Weezing's is its speed. It has 60 HP, 85 attack, 69 defense, 65 special, and 80 speed. With this higher speed, it has almost a 16% chance to crit, which is probably going to be very convenient in today's runs. Finally, as I mentioned before, Muck's stats are by far the best distributed. It has 105 HP and attack, 75 defense, 65 special, and 50 speed. By the way, starting in Generation 2, it was given 100 special defense. If it had 100 special in Generation 1, it would be without a doubt the best mono poison type. But that is not the scenario that Game Freak has given us. So to summarize, in terms of base stat totals, Weezing is the best, Muck is in the middle, and Arbok is last. Whereas with stat distribution, I think that Muck is best, Arbok is second, and Weezing is worst. The higher base speed for Arbok gives it more critical hits, and it also allows it to move first, which means it takes less damage, and when you're doing a solo run, that is very important. Also, it gets access to moves like Fissure, which I hope I am not going to have to use today. However, that move only works if it moves first, so once again, speed is an advantage. However, the best utilization of its higher speed is going to be trapping opponents in the move Wrap. In Generation 1, this is a multi-turn move, and as long as it is affecting the opponent's Pokemon, they cannot make any move selections. As a result, you can infinitely chain the opponent in a Wrap without them ever being able to attack you. However, that is only made possible if you outspeed. But base stats aren't the only thing that define Pokemon. In these solo challenges, growth rates tend to be very important. Luckily today, all of them are even. They all have a medium fast growth rate. Now, let's jump into the footage. I'm going to start with Muck, and let's go through the Pokemon's move pools. Muck starts with Pound, Disable, and Poison Gas. Do note the fact that both Disable and Poison Gas have 55% accuracy. These have to be some of the worst moves in the game. Also, Disable randomly disables one of the opponent's moves in Generation 1, so there isn't really a way to use it strategically. I often have people saying, why not disable Brock's Geodude's Tackle? Well, that's not really the best choice because then it starts using Struggle, which actually has a higher base power than Tackle. Plus, Tackle can miss and Struggle can't. Through level up, Muck gets Minimize at level 33, Sludge at level 37, Harden at level 45, Screech at level 53, and Acid Armor at level 60. I will address Minimize, Sludge, Harden, and Acid Armor later on in the playthrough, but for now let's just go through the rest of the move pool. Through TM and HM, it does not have particularly many moves available to it. It gets Toxic, Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Mega Drain, which I find kind of strange, Thunderbolt, Thunder, Mimic, Fire Blast, and Rest. Yes, I didn't mention Substitute. Pretty much every Pokemon can learn it. However, in a speedrun solo challenge, buying Substitute from the game corner 50 coins at a time just isn't really viable in most playthroughs. So I think because of its limited options, Muck is actually going to play fairly simply. It's going to use one of its setup moves, either Harden or Acid Armor. It's going to use Sludge for same type attack bonus damage, and then likely Body Slam and Thunderbolt. I could of course see Mega Drain, Mimic, or Fire Blast coming in useful in some niche situations, but outside of that, I think Muck is quite straightforward. Weezing is really similar with one notable difference. It starts with Tackle, Smog, and Sludge, the last of which is a fantastic starting move. Then through level up it gets Smokescreen at level 39, Self-Destruct at level 43, which obviously isn't going to be useful today, Haze at level 49, and Explosion, so a lot of useless moves. Do note though that Smokescreen is allowed in my challenges because I can lower the opponent's accuracy, I just can't boost my own evasion in most situations. Through TM and HM, Weezing gets access to Toxic, Hyper Beam, Thunderbolt, Thunder, Mimic, and Fire Blast. It's really similar TM and HM set with the omissions of Body Slam and Mega Drain that Muck has access to. Finally, we have Arbok. It starts with Wrap, Leer, Poison Sting, and then through level up gets Bite, Glare, Screech, and Acid. Honestly, not a very good set, and since there is no TM for Sludge in Generation 1, its hardest hitting same type attack bonus move is going to be Acid, which has a base power of 40. As a result, Arbok is really going to have to rely on TM and HM moves. And there is good news there, because it gets a lot of good ones. Body Slam, Mega Drain, Earthquake, and Rock Slide. I genuinely have no idea why Arbok learns Rock Slide. I can kind of understand the ground type moves, but Rock Slide doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, does it like wiggle around on the ground and like loosen up a bunch of rocks and then they slide down? Like, I'm not sure. Also, I should mention here for the keen-eyed among you, you may have noticed that Arbok learns Skull Bash. You might think that this is going to be a great badge boosting move because it raises defense. However, that secondary effect was only introduced in Generation 2, so in Generation 1, you just waste a turn and then you attack on the second turn. There is no defense stat boost on the first turn. As a result, Skull Bash is basically a useless TM. So with all the introductory material out of the way, let's stick with Arbok's footage as I prepare for Brock. Because I can infinitely trap his Pokemon in Wrap, I don't need to level up that much to defeat him. I just need enough speed to move first against the Onix. In this case, at only level 10, Arbok has 24 speed, which is enough. However, there's still one more bug catcher in the forest, so I finish him off and level up to level 11. Inside of Brock's gym, I figured I might as well face the junior trainer for some quick experience, and after that, I am ready to take on Brock with Arbok. Alright, so let's watch Arbok smash Brock. This is going to be really easy, by the way. I can set up Leer to lower his rock type's high defense, and then when I use Wrap, it will do even more damage. Now, the reason I am doing this is specifically because Wrap doesn't have that much PP, and if I roll really bad turns with it, like a lot of 2 hits or 3 hits, and I'm only doing 1 damage per turn, I could potentially run out. After all, Wrap only has 85% accuracy. I finished the Geodude off, and I still have green health left over for the Onix. Now against it, I need to mention one interesting interaction that is exclusively in Generation 1. If Onix chooses Bide, and then I use Wrap while it is using Bide, it will only accumulate damage based on the damage that the first hit from Wrap did. All subsequent turns will not count towards the counter, so I don't even need to play strategically here and watch carefully just in case I miss with Wrap. No, in this case, I can just spam the move. Eventually the Onix goes down, and Arbok earns itself a respectable Brock split of 6 minutes and 32 seconds. For a mono poison type with only normal and poison type moves, this is an excellent split. However, we have some other strong contenders, and Weezing is definitely one of them. By the way, I am nicknaming all of my Pokemon based on horror movies, so I figured that Weezing should be nicknamed after the Mist. After all, it does learn Haze, which is basically the brother move to Mist. So where Arbok had a fairly quick Brock split, Weezing is likely going to have an even faster split. This is because it starts with Sludge. After the same type attack bonus, this move has an effective power around 97, and then in cases where it's super effective, like against all of the bugs in the forest, it has an effective power of 195. This means Weezing can train very quickly in the early game. Now if you're coming from a future generation, please look up the bug and poison type interactions in Generation 1. The type chart was changed starting in Generation 2, so yeah, the poison type does do super effective damage against bugs here. Now, while it has an advantage in its training rate in the early game, it certainly does not have an advantage with its moves against Brock. The rock and ground types both resist poison type, so I'm going to be doing a quarter damage. This is relevant because in Generation 1, if a move is calculated to do less than 1 damage, it does not round up to 1, it rounds down to 0 and the game displays the text saying that the move missed. I can see a scenario where Weezing is using Smog against Brock, and it is doing absolutely no damage. However, I think Sludge is going to have enough of a punch to get through his tough defenses. So after taking a little bit of extra time to level up to level 13, I felt ready to take him on. Facing his Geodude, it looks like Weezing is doing more than 1 damage, like around 2 or 3 actually, which is really nice. And there's actually an additional factor that is going to help Weezing out in this fight. In Generation 1, Sludge has a 40% chance of poisoning the target, and whenever Brock's Pokemon are poisoned, he is going to use a full heal on them. He has 5 of these in total, which is really frustrating if you want to beat him with a status condition. However, when he uses a full heal, it takes the place of the move that his Pokemon would have used on that turn. As a result of this, Weezing makes it to the Onix with green health remaining. Once again though, the poison statuses come through for me against the Onix, buying Weezing just a little bit more health. However, at level 13, I don't have the damage ranges that I need to finish off both of his Pokemon using Sludge. I run out of PP. By the way, this happened because I faced the junior trainer and then fought Brock immediately after. I figured that Sludge just had enough PP since it starts with 20, but that was definitely a miscalculation. So now against Brock, I am stuck using either Smog or Tackle. In this case, I think that Smog is the better choice because it also has a 40% chance to poison, and if I get enough status conditions, then the Onix will be permanently poisoned, and I can start using Tackle for chip damage. I do get the poison, Weezing has good defense stats, so even after a Screech it isn't taking much damage, and Onix goes down. So Weezing gets itself an initial Brock split of 7 minutes and 25 seconds. It's a little bit slower than Arbok, and that's because I did additional training. I'm not really sure that I needed it, so that might just be some wasted time due to a first playthrough judgment error. Okay, so we have 2 of the 3 splits. Now, let's see how Muck can do in the early game. And anyone who is a Muck fan, I do not have good news for you. This thing definitely has the worst early game moveset. Offsetting that are obviously its monstrous HP and attack stats, and it does have access to Disable, which funnily enough could be advantageous against Brock. I didn't mention it when I was showing the Weezing footage, but if Onix had gone for Bide, I would have had to attack into it. Granted, I would just choose Smog, it would do very little damage, or it would miss. However, with Muck, it can use Disable, which actually does no damage, and it has a very strange interaction if, by chance, it disables Bide when Onix is using Bide. If this happens, Brock basically can't do anything. He can't heal his Pokemon with a full heal if it happens to be poisoned already, and the Onix also does not continue accumulating Bide damage. In addition to this, it cannot attack until Disable expires. When that happens, Bide resumes accumulating damage, and he has to wait until the end of that to attack again, giving Muck more chances to set up Disable again and potentially disable Bide. It is worth remembering though that Disable is random, so this is very RNG based. Still, it is better than attacking into a biting Pokemon if you have low health. Now I mentioned all that about Brock, but just getting to him actually is a little bit frustrating with Muck. Defeating the Bug Catcher's weak Bug-type Pokemon ends up taking quite a while, and I use a lot of Pound's PP, so I backtrack to Viridian City to heal once before continuing. I think all of you very clearly understand where this is going. Muck is definitely going to get the worst Brock split. So, while I finish off Viridian Forest with it, I think we should do a fun back sprite review. Up first, we will start with Muck, who has his fun little silly hand reached up into the sky. This back sprite, definitely S tier. I love it. You can also tell that this is Muck. It works perfectly. Alright, let's go back to Weezing, and honestly, yeah, this one also looks like the Pokemon. So far, these sprites are 2 for 2, they're both good. However, I do think that Weezing's lacks the personality that Muck's has with his cute little hand, so I'm going to put this one in the B tier. Arbok's sprite is actually quite good. I'm going to put it in the A tier because of one interesting fact about it. In Generation 1, it has very prominent W shapes on its back. However, if you check any future sprites, Arbok has since lost these markings. I think they give it a lot of personality, and they definitely make it better to look at when you're viewing the Pokemon from behind. Like, for example, this is the gold back sprite, and yeah, it has like much less personality. So with that section of back sprite review out of the way, let's see how Muck does against Brock at level 13. Pound is doing what looks like 2 to 3 damage against the Geodude, and when I get critical hits, it does a lot. And luckily for me, I score 2 of them, which is quite nice because Muck only has a 10% chance to crit. By the way, I'm just realizing right now that I forgot to mention that earlier in the video. Whoops. Anyways, Onix is next. Against it, I am doing significantly less damage, and also, notably, Muck has 23 speed at level 13, so it is speed tied with Onix. I lose the tie, Onix goes for Bide, and I attack into it with Pound. Okay, so time to chance it with Disable and see if I disable Bide. Unfortunately, I disabled Tackle, so now my best bet is to use Poison Gas and hope for the status. In this case, I managed to get it, but Onyx has already unleashed energy, so I'm not going to get any damage from that poison. However, Brock uses a full heal on the next turn, so I do prevent a little bit of damage. And that's quite relevant, because Muck is under half health, and I was pretty sure that this was going to be its first reset, and that would be the first reset of the video. Onyx hits with Bind, doing a lot of damage, then it uses Bide again, wasting some time. I poison it. I go back to pounding away, but it uses Bide again and reflects damage, taking Muck down to 12 hit points. Alright, this is pretty close. I could do it if I have good RNG. In this case, Onyx gets another Bide, reflecting more damage back to Muck, taking it down to 8 hit points. I go for Pound, and then because Onyx was poisoned, Brock uses a full heal, and this gives Muck the win. So, with no resets, Muck is able to defeat Brock. That was by far the closest fight out of the three, and it is the slowest time. However, this split is actually quite good for Muck. 8 minutes and 35 seconds is by no means bad. It is definitely not out of the race. Like if it had got like 12 minutes or something, I probably would have just written it off right away and made the video with only Arbok and Weezing. So Muck, you were able to hang in there. In this next section of the game, there is only one thing to think about with both Muck and Weezing, and that is how many optional trainers do I want to fight to gain experience. With Muck, I figured that its high HP and attack stat were pretty much going to carry it throughout the next section of the game, so I decided to face the Lass on Route 3, who only has 2 Pokemon. She's a little bit faster if you're using a weak physical move. The Bug Catcher that's just under my sprite has some Cocoon Pokemon, which can be really annoying to knock out. Then in Mamoon, I fight no optional trainers, I grab the Dome Fossil, and I head into Cerulean City. I'm going to ask all of you a question now. Did you catch my mistake with Muck? I am sure that some of you will have already. Skipping more additional training seems like a good idea because once you get by the rival on Nugget Bridge, there is so much more mandatory training that it's going to level Muck up and give it the experience it needs, likely to face Misty. However, what I wasn't thinking about, and what I really should have been thinking about, is the Sandshrew on the rival's team. I have to knock it out with only Pound. And this damage range that I am getting right here against it, which is going to be a 4-hit, is after the Spearow badge boosted me with Leer. Now I'm going to spoil the results of this fight. I get my accuracy lowered once, and as a result I do end up losing. So I'm going to take this opportunity while the footage plays out to describe to all the new viewers how the badge boost works. Whenever your Pokemon's stats are modified, including accuracy and evasion, if you have a badge boost in one of your stats, you have to have either the Boulder badge, the Thunder badge, the Volcano badge, or the Soul badge, then that stat will have an additional 12.5% added onto it. This effect compounds every time your stats are modified. If you're curious about the mechanics, check out the bottom left of the screen because you can see it calculated into my Muck's stats. Right now this badge boost does help me if the Spearow uses Leer against me, but if he uses Growl, it correctly adjusts my attack stat, and then the badge boost is added on top of it, as should be the case. This does mean though that the Sandshrew is going to take even longer to knock out, giving it even more opportunities to use Sand Attack. And in this case it doesn't even get one in. So I made it to the Rattata, and in this case it crits Muck with Hyper Fang, taking it down to 6 hit points, and then after wasting more of my time because I do beat the Rattata, the Eevee comes out and ends the battle. Okay, so maybe the rival is not the right choice for Muck right now. Perhaps facing Misty first makes more sense. Because I realized that I had skipped a lot of optional training that I should have done, I faced the Swimmer at the start of the gym for some additional experience, and then I defeat the Pecking Goldeen trainer to gain access to Misty. Okay, so let's see if Muck can do this. Staryu is up first, I go for Pound, and it does a third. That is really encouraging. However, the Staryu's repeated use of Water Gun does take me down to just above half health before the Starmie comes out. Then, with its water moves, it's doing a lot of damage, and even its tackles are doing a decent amount to Muck. I managed to get it down to orange health, but that isn't enough for a victory. Now, I was pretty indecisive here, and that's something I'm actually trying to get out of my play as much as is possible. The more decisive that you are, the more backtracking time you cut out of playthroughs. Now, I did film this 4 months before I'm recording this voiceover, so in that amount of time, I have learned a lot about the game. I think if I came back to do this again, I would probably try Misty again and use Bide against the Starmie. Since it's doing a decent amount of damage, I could probably survive 2 hits, reflect the damage back at it, and knock it out. In this case though, even with my indecision, I make it back to the rival's Eevee with only -1 accuracy. However, this thing is determined to frustrate me and it uses Sand Attack 2 more times, but Muck still pulls through, lands a Pound, And with that, I have defeated the rival and gained access to Nugget Bridge. There's only one problem for Muck in this area of the game, and that is the Hiker's Geodude. This thing's actually more annoying than Brock's Geodude because it knows Defense Curl, so if you don't have a way to knock it out very quickly, it often becomes an absolute slog, which is what happens today. While this fight isn't difficult, it is wasting precious time. With Bill saved, I head back to Cerulean City to face Misty again. The Staryu gets an X defend, so it takes a total of 4 turns to knock out, even though I am a higher level. It's kind of frustrating. The Starmie is next. I figured that I shouldn't use Bide and I should just go for Pound to get the raw damage in. However, Pound isn't doing that much, and the Starmie is doing a lot of damage still, so I think that Bide was the correct choice here. However, I'm pretty much locked into Pound now because my HP is getting lower. The Starmie hits a Bubble Beam, taking Muck down to 2 hit points. I hit a Pound. Starmie has a chance to attack again, but it just goes for Harden, and I win. Okay, so that was a lucky victory for Muck, and with it, I have cleared Cerulean City, and I am going to make my way into the next section of the game, where it is going to get access to Body Slam. But before that, I need to defeat the Rocket outside of the city. He has a Drowsy, which is the first mandatory Pokemon that knows a Psychic-type move. As you will certainly know, in Generation 1, Psychic types are basically broken, and it is without doubt that many of them are going to be problematic for these Poison types. But for Muck, the Drowsy isn't an issue. On the next route, I have to face Sandy. Muck doesn't actually have any problems, even though it isn't one-hitting the Pidgeys. After that, I finally grab the TM for Body Slam, and I teach it to Muck in the place of Disable because that move is completely trash. I collect the TM for Rest, grab the rare candy, and then I face the rival here. Now, things have changed for Muck, because Body Slam with base 105 attack is something to behold. In this case, I almost one-hit all of the rival's Pokemon, but of course Sandshrew survives. That is actually a bad omen of things to come, because eventually it turns into a Sandslash and gets Earthquake, but we're going to talk about that later. For now, I am headed into Surge's gym to gain myself another useful TM. Okay, so the real question is on Surge, how many resets is he going to cause across all of the playthroughs? My guess is 0. He's pretty bad, and yeah, he doesn't defeat Muck. I beat him with Body Slam, and with that, I earn myself the TM for Thunderbolt. I'm going to teach it to Muck right away. Sometimes it is better to save it until right before Lorelei to teach it, just because Thunderbolt is not that useful throughout the mid-game of Pokemon Yellow. However, these 3 have such confined move pools that it just doesn't make sense to pass up on it now. At long last, with its moves upgraded, Muck is ready to journey into the mid-game. But how are Weezing and Arbok going to deal with Misty and Surge? Let's see. Let's head back to Weezing's footage because this thing is honestly going to stomp the next section of the game. Sludge is just very good now that Brock is behind it. The mandatory trainers on Route 3 have only Bug, Normal, and Poison types. Of course, for Weezing, the Poison types are the most annoying to face, but like some of them are the Weedle lines, so yeah, those don't really matter. In an effort to get as much early experience as is possible, I faced the Bug Catcher with 4 Pokemon. After all, he is a quick sweep. Once again, I just really want to emphasize how good Sludge is as I head into Mount Moon, because here it allows me to do extra training that if I had done with Muck would have taken a lot of time. It still, of course, would have been the right choice. But in Weezing's case, I can quite quickly defeat the Super Nerd. By the way, it's really weird using Sludge on a Magnemite. Yeah, this thing is a Mono-Electric type in Generation 1. Don't worry though, it is still a complete defensive beast for most Pokemon who face it during the champion fight. A quad weakness to ground would be very welcome in Pokemon Yellow. After I've defeated this guy, I take on the Bug Catcher who has 3 Pokemon that are easy to defeat, and then I take on the last just north of him who has 2 Grass Poison types who are also easy. Doing these 3 optional battles, which is 3 more than Muck, gives Weezing level 19 as it exits the cave and heads into Cerulean City. Of course, here I have the standard choice to make. Do I face Misty or the rival on Nugget Bridge? In this playthrough, I chose to face Misty, and here I want to mention the playthrough order that I did because I have to choose which Pokemon I am going to play first. A long time ago, I used to alternate sections of the game to try and make things as fair as possible for all the Pokemon. So an example of that approach would be I'd play Brock with Pokemon 1, then Brock and Misty with Pokemon 2, and then Misty and Surge with Pokemon 1, and continue like this. Taking this approach for about the first year of the channel, I really realized that this actually negatively impacted the play of each Pokemon. Switching back and forth really just made me forget how each Pokemon was working and exactly what was happening in their playthroughs, and overall the quality of the play just got sloppier. As a result, now when I do these videos, I have to choose an ordering that I am going to play the Pokemon in. I like to be as transparent about this as possible, so for this video, I chose to play Muk first, Weezing second, and Arbok third. I specifically did this based on the base stat total distribution. I felt like Muk was going to be the strongest, it also has badge boosting moves, then I thought that Weezing was going to be second, and I thought that Arbok was going to be the worst. Mostly because its base stat total is so significantly below the other two. We can evaluate this decision of ordering at the end of the video and see if I made the right choice. However, for now, this is the circumstance that I am playing with. With Weezing, I had the knowledge that Muk struggled against Misty, but even with that, I figured that it was going to be fine against her just because of the power of Sludge. As you all know, Psychic types do not resist Poison type moves, and when I knock out the Staryu, I get enough experience to level up to 20 over a damage rounding threshold, so I'm going to be hitting even harder now. Starmie's Water Gun doesn't do very much to Weezing, and then my first Sludge does almost half. Next, Starmie goes for Bubble Beam, taking Weezing to a third. My Sludge takes it to the red, and then, luckily for me, it chooses Tackle, which Weezing survives, and I defeat Misty. As expected, Sludge was really able to carry me, so now let's proceed to the rival on Nugget Bridge. By the way, Sludge is going to carry Weezing once again here. I do get hit by one Sand Attack from the Sandshrew, but it doesn't matter. I one-hit the following Rattata, and then the Eevee gets annoying by lowering my attack with Growl, but I poison it, and then eventually it faints. As soon as the rival heads off screen, I'm going to start a timer, and I want to see how long it takes Weezing to get to Bill's house, and we're going to compare this time to the time that it took Muk to play the same section of the game. I know this isn't exactly fair because Muk was at a lower level and I had messed up more with its playthrough. What I really want to give you a sense here is what happens if you have a move like Pound versus a move like Sludge. While that doesn't change overworld time at all, it does impact how long each battle takes, and I want to give an objective measure for exactly what this effect is on the playthrough time. For this test, I started the clock at the frame that the rival exited the screen, and I'm going to stop the timer on the first black frame going through the door transition into Bill's house. By the way, it's worth noting that I play these challenges on 4x game speed. You can see that noted in the top left of the screen, but I do record them in 240 frames per second, so when I'm working with the footage in post and timing it to my narration, I can actually isolate individual frames that the emulator was providing to me while I played. The trend of Pokemon typings along these next two routes is fairly similar to Route 3. There are 3 additional typings thrown into the mandatory battles. One Mankey, which is not particularly notable when you are using a poison type. This guy can be terrifying if you are using a normal type, by the way. I remember him causing many problems during my Porygon playthroughs. The second typing is Grass type at the very end of the route, but that's not a problem either. So really the only issue for these Pokemon is the Hiker with the Geodude. However, for Weezing, this battle is much faster than Muk because Sludge can poison early on. So now we're going to jump ahead in the footage to just when I'm beating the Oddish Lass at the very end of the route, and as Weezing enters Bill's house, the clock is just over 2 minutes and 38 seconds. For Muk, this section of the game took 4 minutes and 4 seconds. So Muk is bleeding time because it has bad moves as it starts. If I had gone back and trained in Mount Moon, yes, it would have been able to defeat the rival more easily, and it probably could have prevented all of the resets on Misty by just not fighting her. However, I still would have bled time in a similar manner while doing training in Mount Moon. So essentially, whatever way you play these two Pokemon, Muk is just going to bleed more time in the early game when compared with Weezing. And I hope that that's not news to anyone. This should be fairly self-explanatory. I just wanted to give some hard numbers for it so that you have a better sense for how this actually stacks up. Alright, so since Weezing is done with Misty, we're going to head on to Sandy on the next route, and here Sludge continues being amazing because I can one-shot all of the Pidgeys. There is no chance of getting stopped here by Sand Attack, barring a Gen 1 miss, that is. Next, I head into the SSN. I do all the standard stuff here, so I grab Rest, grab the rare candy, and then I face the rival. He should be pretty easy for Weezing, despite the fact that I did not get access to Body Slam. That was a big upgrade for Muk, but for Weezing it would still be a lower effective power than Sludge is. Sludge's chance to poison is also nice, nice to add chip damage if you don't one-hit the Pokemon. It can turn some close ranges into a one-turn knockout, which prevents Weezing from taking extra damage. You can actually see that playing out here against the Sandshrew because I poison it, and then it hits a sand attack against me, which is obviously annoying. However, here I am going to draw your attention to my PP because I made a critical error going into this fight. I really should have used one of the ethers that I had picked up earlier on in the run. That way I would have more sludge PP. However, because my accuracy is lowered and I don't have very many sludges remaining, by the time the Sandshrew gets knocked out, I have completely depleted the move, and things are not looking particularly good against the Eevee because it also knows Sand Attack and it continues to lower Weezing's accuracy. In recent days, I have really been trying to improve my strategical play, and one of the errors I think I make in a lot of these runs is how I manage my PP restoring items. With ethers, you can basically just use all of them before you get to the league, and you only really need 3 elixirs to get through the league with most Pokemon. That is, if you don't have some like incredibly weird set like, I don't know, Blizzard, Hyper Beam, Fire Blast, like that one, you might need a few more PowerPoint restoring items. But if you aren't like a Dragonite with those moves, then you're probably going to be fine. As a result, using ethers earlier on will save a lot of time. As a result, the update that I am making to my play is to start using ethers more liberally earlier on. If I can skip a Pokemon Center trip and use an ether, I'm going to do it. If I'm going into a battle with slightly low PP that I think might be problematic, I am going to use the ether. Don't save it for later on. It's just going to clog the bag up and make it harder to pick up useful items like rare candies and vitamins. As a result of this misplay with my ether, I actually take my first reset here with Weezing, which is quite frustrating. When I was filming this video, I had not yet learned the lesson about the ethers, so I once again refused to use it going into the next battle, but the game is kind to me, so I win, and with that, Weezing is headed to face Surge. Okay, so the question still stands, is Surge going to give any Pokemon resets? The fight starts off a little bit annoying because Surge uses Growl, lowering my attack, but luckily for Weezing, to compensate, it gets Poison on the first turn. And then Surge selects Growl again, my Sludge gets a critical hit, bypassing these 2 stat changes, and Raichu faints. Okay, so Weezing has also earned itself Thunderbolt. I'm going to teach it right away, and now let's see how Arbok does. After all, it is by far the most different in this section of the game of these 3 Pokemon. On Route 3, I fight minimum battles as well as minimum Pokemon, and then I head into Mount Moon. Here, I face the Super Nerd as well as the Bug Catcher, and then I head down to the basement floor to face the Super Nerd, where Arbok levels up to level 17 in what is a fairly close fight, but this level gives it access to the move Bite, which is a far better direct damage move than Wrap when you are not scared of your opponent. Here, I should mention a Generation 1 specific fact about Bite, which is it only has a 10% chance to flinch. This was changed starting in Generation 2, so while it isn't as good as it would later be in Generation 2, it's still quite useful, and the flinch mechanic once again makes use of Arbok's higher speed. Now with Jesse and James defeated, I head into Cerulean City. For Arbok, I had already made the decision to face the rival on Nugget Bridge first because facing Misty doesn't make that much sense. I outspeed the Staryu, but I do not outspeed the Starmie, so Wrap isn't a viable option to trap it indefinitely, and once I defeat all of Nugget Bridge and make it to Bill's house, I can fight the Rocket outside of Cerulean City and gain access to the TM for Dig. Obviously, this is the safer choice for facing Misty, so of course I'm going to face the rival first, and here Arbok has answers for everything, which is going to be a trend that plays out through the majority of this playthrough. I start the fight by trying to use Wrap on the Spearow to prevent it from using Growl, but I miss, and then it uses Growl, lowering my attack. So I'm off to a bad start, but it doesn't really matter. I finish the Spearow off with Bite, move on to the Sandshrew, which I infinitely Wrap, preventing Sand Attack entirely, and from there, I spam Bite, defeating both the Rattata and the Eevee. Because symmetry is nice, I am going to report the time that Arbok gets as it makes it to Bill's house. However, there is a big caveat here because I'm going to be starting the timer for this comparison at a different point. I'm going to start it when I beat the rival for the second time, because at the very end of Nugget Bridge, the Rocket, who has an Ekans and a Zubat, the Zubat uses Supersonic, which messes Arbok up, and I have to reset all the way back to the beginning of the route. For anyone out there who is an Arbok fan, I hope that you'll forgive me not saving in front of this Rocket. He doesn't seem like he should be a threat. Anyways, there's some reset time here, but I do follow-up playthroughs for all Pokemon, so that's going to be eliminated in my second run. So as the rival heads off screen, how much time did I lose due to that reset? And the answer is 2 minutes and 31 seconds. Actually, almost 2 minutes and 32 seconds. That was a major reset. Normally, a reset against a trainer is somewhere between 15 to like 35 seconds. This is like 5 times one of those worst case scenarios. However, Arbok might stack up favorably to the other Pokemon in the Nugget Bridge portion of the game. One advantage it does have is it can prevent the Hiker's Geodude from setting up with Defense Curl by using Wrap over and over and over again. This isn't as fast as Weezing using Sludge and Poison, but it is faster than Muck having to rely on Pound. As I make it to Bill's house, Arbok gets a time of 3 minutes and 2 seconds in this section of the game. Results that are honestly unsurprising. It is faster than Muck and slightly slower than Weezing. However, I'm gonna get Dig next, and now things are really going to change for Arbok. In Generation 1, this ground type move has a base power of 100. It is essentially just a 2-turn Earthquake. This is going to be my go-to against Misty. Dig does massive damage, taking the Staryu to red health, and then it gets a critical hit with Tackle, but it doesn't do very much. I finish it on the next turn with Wrap. I really should have used Bite there for the increased accuracy, but it doesn't matter anyways, it hit, so we're moving on to the Starmie. A disadvantage here of using Dig is that it's taking time going underground, which gives the Starmie opportunities to set up using Harden. You might think that Bite is going to be the superior strategy here, but I can't flinch the Starmie since I am not faster than it. Also, Dig is going to do way more damage if it gets a critical hit, and that is fairly likely. Still, because of Hardens, after my third Dig, I take the Starmie to red health, and unfortunately, Arbok does end up going down. This reset cost me 26 seconds, almost 27 seconds of time, so this is sort of a mid-range reset in terms of time lost. In the next fight I played differently, using Wrap to hit the Staryu so that I can knock it out with Dig without sustaining any damage. Then against the Starmie, it goes for Bubble Beam on turn 1 so it's not set up, and Dig does half. It hits Bubble Beam, which does a lot to Arbok because of a critical hit. However, my next Dig also crits, and with that I have defeated Misty. Now on the next route against Sandy, I experimented with my moves. I was hoping Bite would one-hit, but it doesn't, so I use Wrap to finish off her other Pidgeys, bypassing Sand Attack. On the SSN, I teach Body Slam in the place of Poison Sting. Yeah, while Poison Sting gives me like theoretical coverage, it's pretty trash, so I'm just gonna get rid of it now. Arbok honestly does not need a stab move. And with that, Arbok's current set is very stacked. Dig, Wrap, Body Slam, and Bite. I can use Dig whenever I need a lot of damage. Body Slam is my primary damage dealing move. Wrap against really tricky foes that can deal a lot of damage to Arbok if they survive. And then Bite as a finishing move if I want to save PP. After all, Dig only has 10 uses, and in certain sections of the game, like the one that's coming up next, it is very important to preserve this. The rival isn't a problem. I head in to face Surge. I was actually quite surprised here because Dig does not one-shot the Raichu, giving it a chance for a second move. It goes for Mega Punch, doing about a third, and then I take it down. So, no problems with Surge, let's move on. The next section of the game I call the Rock Tunnel Gauntlet because there are so many trainers here that can cause problems for the majority of Pokemon doing these solo runs. Like, if you get through all of these trainers with no issues, your Pokemon is like incredible. It's like Mewtwo or Hypno or something. Now, there's going to be a mild spoiler here, so just mute the audio for the next 5 seconds if you haven't seen my recent Haunter video. But yeah, even Pokemon like Haunter can struggle during this section of the game despite their incredible overall typing. For Arbok, it has the damage ranges it needs to defeat all of the Wrapping Lasses Pokemon, so it's not going to be trapped by the Paralysis Wrap combo today. Then I level up and I have the chance to learn Glare. I did teach it in the place of Bite, but in retrospect I think that this is a mistake. I taught it because Glare could be useful to inflict paralysis and then trap an opponent with Wrap, but it turned out throughout this playthrough I never used that tactic, so this move is dead weight. Just inside of Rock Tunnel is the Pokemaniac with a Cubone and a Slowpoke, and he potentially could be a problem for all of these poison types. The Pokemaniac trainer class has AI modification 3, which I formerly called Good AI, so in this case the Cubone is only going to spam Bone Club, and the Slowpoke is only going to use Confusion. Bone Club is doing about a quarter to me, a little bit more I'd say. I am able to take out both the Cubone and the Slowpoke in 2 hits each. So overall, this fight wasn't that bad for Arbok, but heading into the next battle, which is a Pokemaniac who also has a Slowpoke, this one is 2 levels higher, I just decided to go for the Wrap strategy, take it down to low health, and finish it with Body Slam. There is a subtle trade-off here that I want to mention with doing these runs. If I use Wrap, it is slower during that battle to finish off the Slowpoke, and if I miss, it could be more inconsistent than using a move like Body Slam. However, if the Slowpoke causes a reset with a stray critical hit from Confusion, I know this is unlikely, unlikely because Slowpoke is very slow, it has a low crit rate as a result, but it could happen. If that happens, I'm going to lose a lot of time, and if the Slowpoke just deals some damage to me throughout the fight, maybe takes me down to orange health, then I potentially would have to use a healing item, which also does waste time. Opening the bag and going through the menus is actually one of the biggest time wastes I find in my playthroughs. I think it is one of the things that I do worst in these runs, and I would really like to improve at it, but I just don't really know how. If you have any tips for managing my inventory and things like that, let me know. Normally I just find myself stumbling around looking for the item I need and I waste like an extra 2 or 3 seconds. Okay, so at the end of the cave, of course, we have to face the self-destructing hiker. Arbok has an answer here. It can use Dig. It one-shots all 3 of his Pokemon today. Because the poison type isn't the best typing in the game, I do explore the hideout to collect some extra items as well as a rare candy so that I'm going to be a higher level at finish. After all that, I head into the department store to get another major upgrade to Arbok's moveset. Here, I can trade in the Soda Pop for TM48, which is Rock Slide. In Generation 1, it is worth noting that this move has a base power of 75 and 90% accuracy, and it does not have a flinch chance. The developers just really wanted to make rock moves inaccurate in Generation 1 with no secondary benefit. There are also only 2 rock moves in the entire game, Rock Throw with 65% accuracy, and then Rock Slide with only 75 base power. Still, this move does provide some coverage to Arbok that both Dig and Body Slam do not. For example, it deals more damage to Bug, Flying, and Ice types. As I go into the battle against the rival in Pokemon Tower, you will note that I taught Rock Slide in the place of Wrap. I kept Glare on my moveset. I was just thinking, maybe the status condition will be good at some point. No, it's not going to be good. Attack with Body Slam, you can get paralysis through Body Slam. That is the much better choice. So unfortunately for me, I have lost the ability to leverage Arbok's speed with Wrap in this first playthrough. However, that is really not going to matter in the short term, because the next section of the game is quite easy for Arbok. I can defeat all the trainers in Pokemon Tower without any issues due to my speed and my type coverage, and then I head through Cycling Road to the Safari Zone to collect more vitamins. After that, I go to Erica's gym. This playthrough was filmed a while ago before I realized that this training here is quite inefficient, but I did defeat every optional trainer here, and then I go up against Erica. I'm only going to talk through this fight once in the video because it should be fairly self-explanatory how it's going to go. The poison types are not going to struggle here on average, but they could potentially lose due to how AI Modification 3 works. What it does is it checks each type and its type effectiveness against the opponent's Pokemon. So in this case with Tangela, it is checking the normal type against the poison type and then the grass type against the poison type. When it does this, it checks this giant list of type matchups. And the quirk here is that it takes only the first applicable pair. So for example, in some situations, it will not use a move that is neutrally effective just because the first type pairing that it found showed that that move was not very effective. In this case against the Tangela, it's self-explanatory. It finds that Mega Drain and Vine Whip are not very effective, so it is only going to use Constrict or Bind. Obviously, this thing is not going to knock me out. It could lower my speed with Constrict, which would cause the Weepinbell and Gloom to move first, but for Arbok, it would have to do that twice for Weepinbell and 3 times for the Gloom. I am going to knock it out before that happens. Bind, of course, is frustrating because it wastes time, but overall, the Tangle is not a problem. Against the Weepinbell, things are even easier. It checks both of the typings, finds that both of them are not very effective. That is the only possibility there. So in that case, it will randomize between its moves. This is the only weakness that the poison types have against her team. If they survive your hit and randomize choosing Sleep Powder, they can put you to sleep. Generation 1 sleep is absolutely the most frustrating status condition. I think it is more frustrating than freeze, because with a freeze, you at least know that you've lost. In Generation 1, sleep lasts 1 to 7 turns. Yes, it can last 7 turns. By the way, fun fact, this counter does not reset upon switching out, and a Pokemon cannot move on the turn that it wakes up. Pretty much every trainer class except the youngster and the cue ball. I don't know why the cue ball, but yeah, he's apparently dumb because he does not have AI Modification 1, which just states if the opponent's Pokemon has a non-volatile status condition, do not use status-inflicting moves. So for Erica, in the case that you are put to sleep, she is only going to use damage-dealing moves. And that does mean that these grass types could defeat the poison types with moves like Razor Leaf, Acid, and Petal Dance. But don't worry, no problems for Arbok today. That gives it an Erica split of 37 minutes and 57 seconds. Let's just briefly compare that time with another poison type, Victory Bell. It has actually finished the game by this point, so yeah, Arbok is not doing very well in the grand scheme of things. However, today it's only competing against Weezing and Muck, so I think it's doing quite well. We are now going to head back to Muck's playthrough. The reason I like to stop after Erica is it is usually the last point that the splits all line up 1 for 1. After that point, the game becomes highly variable. Each Pokemon usually ends up defeating trainers in different orders, and so comparing like a Sabrina split to a Blaine split doesn't always feel very fair. Now when compared to Arbok, both Muck and Weezing are actually a little bit better prepared for the tunnel. With Body Slam, Muck is able to knock out the Cubone in 2 hits. And then against the Slowpokes, I can use Thunderbolt for super effective damage. All of that being said though, there is one exception, which is the self-destructing Hiker. Right now Muck's set is Body Slam, Pound, Poison Gas, and Thunderbolt. Obviously, I do not have any good options against the rock types right now, but this is a fairly easy fix, because if I just teach Muck Rest in the place of Pound, then every time they use self-destruct, I can simply heal and move on to the next Pokemon. By the way, rest here is basically just an insurance policy. I can attack with Body Slam and hopefully finish them off faster than them using self-destruct. However, if they do and I'm in a tight situation, I won't lose. Muck makes it through the fight with no resets and enters Celadon City. I'm going to do the hideout here, then head to the department store, and for Muck, I'm going to buy 1 Carbos and 4 Protein. In the mid-game of Pokemon Yellow, there are so many fast Psychic types that are at high levels, and they have much better movesets than they do in Pokemon Red and Blue. As a result, I am hoping that I can outspeed some of them, most notably Koga's Venonats and the rival's Kadabra in Silph. I just don't have a chance to outspeed Koga's Venomoth or Sabrina's team. The rival in Pokemon Tower isn't an issue for Muck, but the mandatory Chandler with 2 Ghastlies could be challenging. With Arbok, I could one-hit both of her Pokemon with Dig, but with Muck, I am stuck using Thunderbolt, which does not one-hit. As a result, the Ghastlies can confuse, paralyze with Lick, and then do decent damage with Nightshade. However, Muck has a high HP stat, so I can survive this decently well, and I do take a first attempt victory. Still though, I think it's worth noting that this is a possible reset point, so I think saving in front of her is the safest play. If I wanted to go really fast though, I could just skip this save. I think that Muck has good odds here. Alright, so let's skip ahead to Erica. By the way, I did defeat all the trainers in her gym. Now, against her, Muck does not have particularly good luck. I get my speed lowered by Tangela to 40, which means the Weepinbell is faster, and then it puts Muck to sleep. I do manage to wake up, but then the Weepinbell uses Stun Spore, so Muck is even slower now, meaning that, yeah, I'm gonna not move first against the Gloom. However, I have Rest, which is going to prevent a reset here, although it does extend Muck's battle time just slightly. And at long last, when I defeat her, Muck gets a big reward because it can learn Sludge in the place of Poison Gas. This gives it a 40-minute and 20-second Erica split. So in these first playthroughs, Arbok is roughly 2.5 minutes ahead of Muck. However, do remember that one major reset that I had on Nugget Bridge and the sloppiness that I had with Muck. So I think that overall Arbok should be a little bit further ahead, but both of their times should be overall lower. Up until this point in the game, Weezing has been absolutely destroying things. Its only reset has been a silly player error due to a lack of using an Ether. It's not as dominant as Arbok is throughout the Rock Tunnel section of the game, and it's a little bit worse than Muck because it doesn't have the same attack stat or Body Slam. So while it is losing a little bit of pace here, it doesn't face any major threats that it doesn't have an answer for. Against the self-destructing Hiker, I can use the exact same strategy as with Muck and make it to Celadon City. Here, I'm going to take the same approach. Then in the department store, I'll mention the vitamins that I buy. In this case, 2 Carbos and 3 Protein. I'm just kind of evenly distributing things here. Weezing's slightly higher speed, I think, is going to give it outspeeds against all the Psychic types I mentioned earlier. And I don't want to over-invest in speed when there are some Pokemon that I'm just not going to move first against. In Pokemon Tower, it has the same problems against the Chandler that Muck has. It has to 2-hit all of her Pokemon with Thunderbolt, but it isn't an issue today. Alright, so let's face Erica and see what Weezing's time's going to be. If you direct your eyes to the clock, you will see that this thing is absolutely tearing through the game in comparison to the other two. I knock out the Tangela with 1 non-critical hit from Sludge. Then, against the Weepinbell, it just misses Sleep Powder and I finish it off. And then the Gloom does the exact same thing, giving Weezing a 5-turn victory against Erica and a real time of 33 minutes and 4 seconds. Access to early Sludge has really given Weezing so much momentum. And now here in our journey we have the potential for diverging paths. With Weezing I head to Silph first. Now the reason I'm doing this is that I don't think I can beat Koga right away. While Sludge is neutral against the Venonat line, he's going to be hitting with super effective Psychic pretty much every turn, and I don't think that I can one-hit all of the Venonats. Silph is the only alternative because without Koga's badge, I can't surf to Cinnabar Island and face Blaine. And with the rockets still occupying Saffron City, I can't enter Sabrina's gym, but like, why would I enter Sabrina's gym? I have a poison type. I definitely don't want to fight her yet. Silph is also an excellent place to get some extra experience. After all, these trainers all disappear after you defeat Giovanni, so fighting them now is a good idea. During this grind, I teach Weezing Smokescreen in the place of Tackle. Sludge has decent neutral coverage against most things, and if I'm not using it, I can probably hit the Pokemon with Thunderbolt. I don't really want to be using Tackle either way, and I know there's ground types, but Sludge is just better against them in all ways. Higher effective power, higher accuracy, and a chance to poison. In Silph, I always have to make a decision. Do I want to use rare candies in front of the rival, or do I want to save them for later? Saving them for later ensures a higher level at the finish of the game, but using them earlier ensures a faster mid-game. This question is very simple to answer. If you have seen my solo playthrough with Coughing, you will know that the champion caused a lot of problems. So I want to put the time in now, invest in training, and level up as much as possible. For the rival fight here, I typically target level 40. I think that this gives most fully evolved Pokemon the best chance of defeating him on their first attempt without losing any time. So will it be enough for Weezing? Up first is Sandslash, and against this thing I'm going to have to use Sludge. However, before that I get one turn of Smokescreen in, just to lower Sandslash's accuracy to make Sand Attack less likely. By the way, in Generation 1, the AI has a 25% chance of missing Sand Attack, so it's not that consistent. With an accuracy debuff stacked on top, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get hit. I felt safe doing this because the Sandslash knows no ground type moves so far, and then, after that setup, I can knock it out over 4 turns with Sludge due to poison damage. Next is Cloyster. I was surprised Thunderbolt didn't one-hit. It survives on a sliver of health and confuses Weezing. I knock it out on the next turn, hit myself against the Magneton, and then finish it off over 2 turns. Next is Kadabra, and unfortunately for me it is faster than Weezing. Of course the poison type is neutral against the psychic type, and all poison moves are physical in Generation 1, so this was the best choice, and it secures the one-hit. All that's left is Flareon, I survive 1 attack, and finish it off. The rival was not that difficult, but in contrast, Giovanni actually puts up a fight. And the reason that he does is because the Rhyhorn and the Nidoqueen both resist Sludge, and Thunderbolt cannot hit either of them. At this point, without defeating Koga, I cannot access Fire Blast, so I'm stuck chipping away at the Rhyhorn with Sludge as well as poison damage. I think that I should have realized earlier on that I should be spamming Smokescreen to lower its accuracy, and then Thunderbolt to deplete my PP as fast as possible, so that I can potentially use Struggle against the Nidoqueen when I run out of Sludge. However, I don't even get a chance to run out of Sludge. Giovanni has AI modification 3, therefore the Nidoqueen is always going to choose between Scratch, Tail Whip, and Body Slam. 1 in 3 turns it will lower my defense, and on the other turns it will deal damage to me. I didn't catch onto this combo quite fast enough, which would have allowed me to set up Smokescreen quicker, and as a result, the Nidoqueen takes me down. I lost to Giovanni. It's so frustrating. I was actually a little bit overconfident going into that fight, so my reset takes me back before Jesse and James. This is a similar category of mistake that I made with Arbok on Nugget Bridge, so let's count up the amount of time that this ends up losing Weezing. In this case, going from the first black frame at the start of the Jesse and James fight to the first black frame at the second Jesse and James fight, Weezing loses a total of 1 minute and 35 seconds. That is about 3/3 of the time that Arbok lost, so Weezing is still in a commanding lead. The solution for Nidoqueen is very obvious, just spam Smokescreen, lower its accuracy, and then knock it out slowly using Sludge. With Silph complete, it's time to head to Fuchsia City to go to the gym, where I can face the mandatory trainers. They have a lot of psychic types, but Weezing is fast enough to outspeed even the Kadabras on their teams, so they aren't a problem because Sludge is doing enough damage. The question now is just how brutal Koga is going to be. If this fight is going to be easy for Weezing, I have to one-hit all of the Venonats. Due to his AI, he's always going to choose Psychic moves from the first 3 Pokemon on his team. That'll mean Weezing will take a lot of damage, with the potential for having its special lowered, meaning that the damage from subsequent Pokemon will be increased, or the second Venonat could confuse me. For Weezing fans, of course, you have seen the bad news. I am nowhere near one-hitting the Venonats. I'm basically just doing more than half to them, which is really unfortunate. I think if I got extremely bad rolls, I might 3-hit the third one, and yeah, that is just not acceptable. Even with 2 hits throughout the first 2 Venonats, Weezing still goes down before I even make it to the Venomoth. And that thing is a really powerful Psychic ground type, so Weezing would struggle against it even more. And yes, for those of you who are new to my channel, I did just say that Venomoth is a Psychic ground type. I should really correct myself there. I don't know why I said that. It's obviously a dark ghost type. It's actually very thematic of Halloween. Anyways, let's get back on track. Weezing is definitely going to have to do some training. I head to the fighting dojo, fantastic experience yields here. Then I go back to Cycling Road. I kind of hate having to backtrack like this, but defeating all these trainers is the best choice. There isn't really another good experience yield location available to me right now without Surf. Like, it is possible to fight the trainers on Route 15, but whenever you're doing that, like, something has gone wrong. After all of this, Weezing is level 48, so let's see how Koga is now. Well, Sludge can still not one-hit the first Venonat, so it's going to be 2 hits across the board here. This time, though, I make it to the final Venonat, and I am able to take it out, moving on to the Venomoth. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned the wonkiness of the type chart in Generation 1, so Koga's Venomoth has multiple super effective moves on its set against Weezing, which is to be expected of the Psychic ground type. In this case, it has Leech Life and Psychic. I got lucky here. It goes for Leech Life on turn 1, so Weezing survives, gets another Sludge, but I don't crit, and because of the healing from Leech Life, Venomoth hangs on. However, it still might roll Leech Life again, and it does. So with that, Weezing defeats Koga, earning itself the Soul Badge and a 12.5% boost to its speed stat. Let's continue watching Weezing throughout the late gym leaders and head to take on Sabrina in Saffron City next. No matter which way I come at this fight, it is always going to be a bit of a gamble for Weezing. It's not going to outspeed the Kadabra or the Alakazam unless I use rare candies early on into the playthrough, and as I mentioned before in a first attempt with a poison type, I don't think that that's a good idea. Now this fight would be almost impossible if Sabrina knew that she should be using the move that does the most damage, for instance in this case Psychic, but she doesn't, so Weezing takes a first attempt victory. With her out of the way, I surf to Cinnabar Island, and then I take on Blaine, fighting no more optional trainers in between. For most Pokemon, he is one of the more challenging gym leaders, but today Weezing actually does quite well. It 2-hits both the Ninetales as well as the following Rapidash, and then against the Arcanine, while it does take damage on the first turn, it tries to set up on the second turn with Reflect, but with poison damage as well as one more Sludge, it is enough and Weezing wins. Alright, so there is only one gym leader left. It is Giovanni in Viridian City, and these poison types do not match up well against him in terms of typing. For Weezing, the matter is even more complicated because Thunderbolt does not hit ground-type Pokemon, so this move is completely useless during the fight. And I don't want to get rid of it, that would be short-sighted, just because it has so much utility during the league. As a result, I am only going to have 3 move slots to work with for this battle. It's obvious that Smokescreen isn't really helping me at all, even though it was useful with Coughing, so today I'm going to give it up in favor of having Mimic. And with that, I am ready to take on Giovanni. Using Mimic during this fight provides Weezing with 2 options. It can either steal Dugtrio's Earthquake and then use it for super effective damage against the Nidoqueen, Nidoking, and Rhydon, or I can defeat the Dugtrio, move on to the Persian, and steal Double Team, setting up my Evasion. Now I know all of you really do not like Evasion boosting moves, and this is my first playthrough, so the Pokemon is not going to be ranked based on this time. This is just to feel things out and see how Weezing is doing. So I'm not going to be using the Double Team strategy. I would rather experiment with the Earthquake strategy and see how it does. Dugtrio is able to get 1 Earthquake in, which does more than a third to Weezing. Luckily, I take the Persian out without taking any damage and move on to the Nidoqueen. Unfortunately though, Earthquake is not near one-shotting it yet at this level, it just takes it to orange. As a result, Nidoqueen does a lot of damage, taking Weezing to red health, and from there I was pretty sure that I was going to lose. However, on every turn, Giovanni has a 25% chance to use a Guard Spec, which is what happens against the Nidoking. Now remember what I said at Brock, the AI has items programmed per Pokemon, so he could still use a Guard Spec on the Rhydon. However, in this case, he doesn't, choosing Earthquake, and as a result, Weezing goes down. Instead of doing this fight again, I do some additional training and then I head to the power plant to pick up an additional rare candy. So Weezing is level 52 right now, and I'm going to use 8 rare candies to take it up over 4 damage rounding thresholds to level 60. What I'm hoping for here is that this massive increase in stats and damage is going to give me enough to knock out the Nidoqueen and the Nidoking in one hit so that I can survive a hit from the Rhydon and take it down. Also, I really want to note that level 60 is great for this fight because Weezing has exactly 135 speed, meaning it's tied with the Persian, but the Dugtrio cannot knock it out with Fissure. Also, I'm always going to move first against it, meaning the Dugtrio can only attack once. However, in this case, it just gets a guard spec and I knock it out for free. After that, I take the Persian out with 2 hits, also not taking any damage, and now I've made it to the final 3 Pokemon. Nidoqueen, the more defensive of the two, goes down to a single Earthquake. Okay, that was a critical hit. What about the Nidoking? And in this case, it does go down to a single Earthquake. So, all that's left is Rhydon. I choose Earthquake. It does more than half. Giovanni guard specs, and with that, Weezing has finished the gym challenge. And this is going to be our next spot to compare splits, so Weezing got a time of 56 minutes and 51 seconds. So the big question is, was Weezing able to maintain its lead that it earned in the early game? To examine that, let's go through Arbok's mid-game. Mirroring Weezing, I head to Silph next, and I figured that Arbok wouldn't need to do as much training just because of its type coverage. So Weezing faced the rival at level 40, but Arbok is going to do it starting at level 37. For this fight, I made use of the TM that Erica gave me to teach Mega Drain. This is going to give me some recovery against the Sand Slash, which annoyingly does get 1 sand attack in before I knock it out. And this is also going to give me a special move to use against the Cloyster, which has massive physical defense. I finish it off, move on to the Magneton, which actually survives a dig despite it being super effective, but I polish it off with Body Slam, and then from there the Kadabra and the Flareon don't stand a chance. So even with the accuracy drop, Arbok has no resets here and it lost minimal time. With Dig, Giovanni is not a problem at all, and from there I head to Koga's gym to take him on. In this case, Rock Slide gives me super effective damage against all of his Pokemon, but unfortunately the first Venonat survives on red health. I crit the second one, knocking it out in 1 turn, but then the third one gets a massive Psychic in, taking Arbok down to red health. Now my speed stat is currently 95, so I'm not going to move first against the Venomoth, and as a result I get a reset. So while I was able to save some time training earlier on, I think Arbok is going to have to do it now. If I level up to 45, I will both get more damage, as well as 104 speed, which is 1 more than Koga's Venomoth. At this level, Rock Slide 1 hits the first, second, and third Venonats, allowing me to get to the Venomoth with full health. Now I got a bit of unfortunate luck here because Rock Slide missed on the first turn. Luckily though, the Venomoth went for Leech Life. It doesn't gain back any health because it's already at full. Then on the next turn I hit with Rock Slide, survive its follow-up Psychic, and that means Arbok has made it past Koga. Now I mentioned that after Erica is when the playthroughs really diverge. That's not exactly true. They could diverge just before Erica. You could face Erica before Surge, for example, if you really don't want to face him, but like, why would you do that? Also, to this point, the poison types have been on the same route, but now I'm going to change things. Where with Weezing, I went and took on Sabrina because I was a lower speed, I think it is better for Arbok to take on Blaine. Currently with 118 speed, I tie his Rapidash, which is his least powerful Pokemon, and if I defeat him, I will level up, gaining more speed, allowing me to outspeed Sabrina's Abra as well as Kadabra. It has the exact same speed as the Rapidash, by the way. Also, fighting him makes sense because Arbok has Dig, which is super effective, but it just barely does not knock out the Ninetales, which then gets a massive Flamethrower in, followed up by a Quick Attack. That leaves Arbok on orange health for the rest of the battle. I briefly try to cheat by opening my inventory and trying to use the Bicycle, but don't worry, Oak makes sure that I follow the rules, and with that I get back to the battle fighting the Rapidash. It frustratingly wins the speed tie using Growl, lowering my attack stat, and as a result my follow-up Dig only does half, giving the Rapidash a Fire Spin, which takes Arbok down to 2 hit points. Okay, so I'm going to finish it off on the next turn, however the Arcanine is by far Blaine's most bulky Pokemon. Also, the fact that I'm going to be using Dig against it means it has a chance to set up Reflect, which is what it does on the first turn that I'm underground. And then this happens. I get a critical hit and knock the Arcanine out in a single turn. That was definitely a lucky win for Arbok, but I'll take it. With the Volcano badge, I get a 12.5% boost to my special stat, which is going to be immediately useful because I'm going to take on Sabrina now that my speed stat is enough to move first against the Kadabra. This allows me to make it to our Alakazam with full health. Now this thing can use Reflect to minimize the damage from physical moves, but it just goes for Recover on the first turn, and then my Body Slam paralyzes it. With its speed cut, Arbok moves first and takes it out on the next turn. Basically a perfect victory. At the end of this battle, I think I should address something that many of you will be wondering. Why am I still using Dig when it costs 2 turns in battle, when I could just teach Arbok Earthquake at this point? After all, I picked it up when I was in Silph. Well, the answer is quite simple. If you watch here closely, inside of Sabrina's gym, you can actually use Dig to escape very quickly. That's also the case for locations like Silph, Pokemon Mansion, as well as Blaine's gym. So usually I like to keep it around until now, but now all those locations are behind me, so I can teach Earthquake, and I am also going to use rare candies on Arbok. In this case, I go from level 49 up to level 53. This is very intentional so that my speed is more than both the Dugtrio as well as the Persian, and so I'm over a damage rounding threshold. Earthquake allows me to one-hit the Dugtrio. Against the Persian, he goes for a guard spec, and I finish it off with a second Earthquake. Okay, so it's time for the Nidos. Unfortunately here, I am not close to knocking the Nidoqueen out. It hits a massive Earthquake, taking Arbok down to orange health. I do finish it, but the following Nidoqueen is too much, and Arbok goes down. So I'll use 5 more rare candies and go up to level 58 before trying again. This still does not give me the damage range that I need to knock out the Nidoqueen in one hit, but I do knock out the Nidoking in a single hit. That allows me to make it to the Rhydon where I can use Mega Drain. However, with Arbok's fairly low special attack, this does not do enough damage and the Rhydon survives. However, Giovanni uses a guard spec, as he has been doing throughout these playthroughs, and Arbok gets the win. So its Giovanni split is 53 minutes and 46 seconds. The lead that Weezing had in the early game has evaporated, and Arbok has taken a very commanding lead. At this point in the playthrough though, I wasn't that surprised by these results because I figured Arbok was going to gain a lot of momentum throughout the early game. However, I'm expecting it to slow down once we reach the champion. After all, in my Ekans video, I had to resort to some truly awful strategies to beat him on my first attempt. Before we get there though, let's talk about Muck's mid-game. Similar to Weezing, I trained to almost level 40, like it's basically level 40. I figured I was going to 3-hit the Sand Slash anyways. Muck has a little bit higher attack, so I thought this was going to be okay. However, the Sand Slash actually puts in work doing half damage to me before I finish it off. Luckily though, Cloyster is quite weak to Thunderbolt, so I just one-hit it. Then on the following Magneton, I take things slow, using Rest to heal. However, Kadabra is faster than Muck, it hits Psybeam and knocks me out in a single critical hit. Here, I make what I consider to be a critical mistake with Muck. I really think just because that was a crit, I should have attempted this battle again and just won on the second attempt. However, something I was thinking about during these playthroughs is the fact that I really don't want to bash my head against a trainer 3 or 4 times and just lose using the same strategy. So, thinking about that and not really considering all of the factors, I decided to go and face Koga instead. And a level 41 Muck against Koga is just not a good idea. I don't think I need to tell anyone that. There is no way I'm going to outspeed the Venomoth with this thing, and while Sludge is doing half, I've just taken too much damage to this point in the fight, so that is another reset. With a loss in both locations, I decided to go and train, so I take on the Fighting Dojo, as well as some additional trainers in Silph. Training up to level 45 gives me enough experience to learn Harden, but this is actually a hard choice. If I want the badge boosting move, I am going to have to give up one of my current moves, and all of them are quite good. Of the 4, I think that Body Slam is going to have the least utility, because once you clear Blaine, it starts becoming much less useful. So with my badge boosting move, I head back to Koga, but I don't actually have the intent of using it. I'm just going to spam Sludge and knock out all of his Pokemon, which allows me to make it to the Venomoth with orange health. This time I get lucky because it just spams Leech Life a bunch, and I do finish it off. With Muck, I made the decision to face Blaine first, specifically because the Ninetales uses a lot of Tail Whip, and I use a lot of Harden. Every time the Ninetales uses Tail Whip, it badge boosts me, and then I can just use Harden to take away the stat change and increase my badge boosts even more. What I figured was this was going to allow Muck to set up to a ridiculous level where I could just one-hit everything with Sludge, plus I have the badge boost from Koga's badge, so I am going to be faster than everything. With 238 in my attack stat, I go for it, but Sludge does not knock out the Ninetales. And it also doesn't knock out the following Rapidash. Luckily it just goes for Stomp and does very little. Okay, the Arcanine is definitely going to survive. It does, goes for Flamethrower, and Muck goes down. Alright, so I just need to make sure that I set up more. If Ninetales does too much damage, I can just heal with rest, which is exactly what I do. I figured that eventually I'd have enough health to sweep, but the Ninetales uses confusion to mess Muck up, and I have another reset. Actually, not just one more reset, 2 more resets. I made the decision to face the trainers in Blaine's gym for extra experience. At level 48, I tried again, and once again I get another reset. So this was quite frustrating, and when I get frustrated, I get very stubborn and just decide to keep attempting until I get the win. And it's actually good I did that, because immediately in the next fight I'm able to get set up to +6 defense, and from there I sweep Blaine's team. If you just saw this fight alone, it would look extremely easy for Muck, but it really wasn't. With him out of the way, I head to Saffron City, and I actually misremembered. I thought I had defeated the rival here, so I walk north and then see the rocket in front of Copycat's house, and I'm just like, no, I have more to do. However, now that I'm very overleveled, the rival in Silph isn't a problem for Muck. It also has an advantage against Giovanni that Weezing doesn't have. Whenever Weezing has its defense lowered by the Nidoqueen's Tail Whip, it has no way to recover this defense stat, whereas Muck, if it really needs to, can use Harden to cancel out this stat change and further badge boost its attack stat. As a result, fighting Giovanni, I have no resets. In Saffron City's gym, I fight optional trainers specifically to get Muck up from level 50 to level 52. This is so I have exactly 104 speed to move first against Sabrina's Abra. That way I'm never going to get hit by Flash, and I can move on to the Kadabra and Alakazam every time and roll the dice here. The Kadabra chooses Recover, I move on to the Alakazam, which sets up Reflect, but Sludge still does half. It goes for Recover, healing to full, I take it back down to half, Alakazam goes for Psychic, dealing massive damage, but Muck survives. I do get a special drop, but this badge boosts my attack stat, giving me a better damage range, and Alakazam goes down on the next turn. Okay, so Muck is heading towards Giovanni, and I'm sure if you're looking at the clock you can see, this thing is by far going the slowest. I guess we should expect that, like, look at Muck, it does not look like it should go very fast. However, Muck does really have a lot going for it, especially in the late game. I can use rare candies from level 53 up to level 60, where it learns Acid Armor. In this case, it is just a better Harden. It does trigger the badge boost less, but it'll allow me to set up much faster, which I think is going to be very important against Giovanni. In this case, my plan is to set up right away, minimize damage, boosting my attack stat in the process, and then sweep with a Mimicked Earthquake. However, look at how much damage Dugtrio's first hit does to Muck. Like, that is so much. And I am also significantly underspeeding, so it's always going to move first. I tried to just mimic Earthquake right away and then go for the sweep, which actually does knock out the Dugtrio, as well as the following Persian with a critical hit. Okay, so this is actually pretty good for Muck. It is now faster than all of Giovanni's Pokemon. Earthquake 1 hits the Nidoqueen, Earthquake 1 hits the Nidoking, and with that, Muck has arrived at Rhydon. Earthquake hits, Rhydon survives on Orange, hits Earthquake, and Muck goes down. That fight kind of teased me. Pretty frustrating. However, against the Dugtrio at the beginning of the fight, it's not always going to attack. Sometimes it goes underground on its first turn, that way I will get an Acid Armor up before it hits me. You do have to be a bit worried here though, because it can crit, and in those cases it will deal massive damage, which is actually exactly what happens here. However, with 2 turns of Acid Armor, I now outspeed the Dugtrio, so if I get one more free turn to steal Earthquake, I think I can sweep. Unfortunately for me though, Dugtrio does go underground. I say that this is unfortunate because in Generation 1, Earthquake does not hit Pokemon that are underground. That bonus effect that the move has was only introduced in Generation 2. However, because I'm outspeeding, I now know that the Dugtrio is going to hit me on the next turn, so I can use Acid Armor, boosting my attack and defense even more. Dugtrio does not get a crit, so Muck survives, and from there I am set up to sweep. This is the best that I possibly could do. Will it give me the damage range that I need on the Rhydon? And the answer is yes. So Muck clocks in with a Giovanni split of 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 24 seconds. Arbok has a lead over Weezing by 3 minutes and 5 seconds. And Weezing has a lead over Muck by 7 minutes and 33 seconds. And so Muck is trailing Arbok by 10 minutes and 38 seconds. Throughout the run so far, Muck has really not had a chance to build any momentum, which is actually quite unfortunate for it because it just got its best move, Acid Armor. It is likely going to close the gap slightly in the next section of the game, but what can you really do when there are only 6 trainers remaining? Of them, the rival on Route 22 is the first one. He leads with a Sand Slash, which is kind of annoying to defeat with Muck. I have to use Sludge to take it out. I think maybe here I should have used Acid Armor to set up. However, I figured that Muck was just going to have what it needed to win the fight without setup, because I'm already naturally outspeeding the Kadabra. However, the Magneton, as it is known to do, survives a physical hit, paralyzes my Pokemon, and as a result, I am no longer going to move first against the Kadabra. However, it just goes for Reflect, and I finish it off in one hit anyways. The Flareon that follows does survive a single hit from Sludge, but I cause poison, and as a result, it slowly fades away. So Muck made it through the rival battle on its first attempt, and that is not something that Arbok is able to do. It does have a single reset here, and the reason is, as you would expect it to be, paralysis. There is no way for Arbok to knock out the Execute in a single turn, so it has a chance to roll for Stun Spore. It's obviously not going to be choosing Poison Powder, so this move is more likely. By the way, if we analyzed all of the statistics from this rival battle, I bet the one reason that I would always lose is that I'm getting paralyzed. Both the Execute and Magneton can inflict the status condition, or the Jolteon if you're facing that team, and this status is by far the worst one in the game. Losing both speed and consistency is just terrible. Honestly, in a solo run, paralysis would still be quite good for the AI, even if I didn't have a chance to miss my move. However, in the next fight, I critical hit the Execute, and from there, things are quite easy. I can use Mega Drain to one-hit the Cloyster, and just sweep his team with Earthquake. That brings us to our final Pokemon, Weezing. It plays this fight very similarly to Muck. It has to take its time on the Sand Slash. It can luckily one-hit the Execute as well as the Cloyster, but then against Magneton, it's not going to be able to get the one-hit, so there's a chance for paralysis. But it doesn't happen, so Weezing also has no resets during this battle. And with that out of the way, we are ready at long last to head into the Elite Four. For Muck, things start out fairly straightforward. Against Lorelei, I can attack with Thunderbolt on the first turn, forcing the Dugong to use Rest on the second turn, and knowing this, I can set up Acid Armor, boosting my special a little bit. I only went for 2, and then I knocked the Dugong out, and the Cloyster that follows it is actually a one-hit. Which brings us to our third Pokemon, which is actually the dilemma for all of these poison types. This thing knows Amnesia and Psychic, and she also has AI modification 3, 2, and 1. She has all of them. Now, AI modification 2 is one that I talk about very rarely, but essentially what it does is it forces the trainer to use a setup move on turn 2. So the Slowbro could attack with Psychic on turn 1, but then it is going to set up with Amnesia on the second turn. There are two ways that I could play this. Either go for Thunderbolt right away and knock out the Slowbro as fast as is possible. The hope here is that I can avoid getting hit by an Amnesia boosted Psychic or a critical hit Psychic, even though that's quite unlikely. Or alternatively, I can use Mimic to steal Amnesia myself, improving Thunderbolt's damage and making the rest of the fight more consistent. You can see here from the footage that I debated using Mimic, but I don't end up doing it, and that's a good choice because Thunderbolt one-hits. Following that, Jinx is very physically frail. I knock it out, move on to the Lapras, which I nearly one-hit. However, when Lorelei's Pokemon are at low health, she has a chance of using a Super Potion. In this case, she does, and when she uses it, it doesn't function like future generations. In this case, it replaces the move that she's going to use, so I'm able to finish the Lapras off for free and proceed with the league. Now, it is my personal preference in these videos to completely skip talking about the battle in the very next room. However, today I should mention it. In Pokemon Yellow, this team got significant upgrades to their movesets. The Onixes now have Dig and Earthquake respectively. As a result, there is at least theoretically a fear here with all of these poison types that I could have a reset. However, for Muck, that is not going to be an issue. Of course, I can just set up Acid Armor, so I'm going to take way less damage from physical moves. There are some special moves that the Hitmonchan knows, but like it's completely trash because of its low special stat. Also, one thing about these Pokemon having better moves is the fact that I can just use Mimic to steal Dig for super effective damage against the Onixes, so even these Pokemon do not take a long time for Muck to knock out. I finish the Machamp off, and with that, I am ready to proceed to Agatha. Now, all of her Pokemon resist Poison-type moves, so my best choice here for Muck is going to be using Thunderbolt. I also want to use Mimic to steal the first Gengar's substitute, however, Agatha switches on the turn that I use this, so then I would have to mimic a move from the Golbat. If I do this, there will be a glitch that occurs where the move that I copy will be placed in my second move slot, and in this case, that is Acid Armor, and I really want to set up with it. By the way, for a long time I have been saying that this move is permanently replaced. That is specifically because this is what people told me. I actually never tested it, which is definitely on me, so I'm sorry for the misinformation because it is actually not permanent. If you copy a move from the Golbat, you can just continue with the fight. If you win, you will no longer have that move, and in this case, Acid Armor would be restored as it was before the battle. However, here when I was filming this run, I did not know this piece of information, so I am going to reset. Either way, I do think that this is the faster choice. Stealing Substitute, setting up with Acid Armor, and then using Thunderbolt to sweep is going to be a more consistent path to victory. After all, using Acid Armor is triggering the badge boost, giving me more speed and special, which means I'm going to outspeed Agatha's Pokemon, and I am also going to hit harder when I use Thunderbolt. So when I have a substitute in place, I want to talk about the possibilities for me to lose. First of all, confusion cannot mess me up. If I am pre-confused before I set up the substitute, then even if I hit myself in confusion, the damage that my Pokemon does to itself will be instead applied to the opponent's substitute if they have one. If they don't have one, it will just say that it is applied to their substitute and nothing will happen. Oh, Generation 1, I love you so much. Also, substitute completely blocks Confuse Ray as well as Supersonic. It also blocks Toxic, of course that isn't relevant today, and it does additionally block secondary effects from Lick, so I can't be paralyzed that way. However, it does not block sleep-inducing moves like Hypnosis, so the second Haunter as well as the final Gengar can both put me to sleep. It also does not block the Arbok's Glare, so I could get paralyzed there. However, that's often an advantage for the Pokemon that I'm running because then the Gengar can't use Hypnosis on me. That eliminates Dream Eater as a possibility for damage, so then really the only way it can hit me is with Psychic, and since she doesn't have AI modification 3, she's going to be randomly choosing moves, and that's a 1 in 4 chance. Overall, the odds are stacked in Muck's favor, so it takes a second attempt victory. And with that, I am headed to Lance. Now before this fight, I am just going to remind you that I only have one rare candy left over, and I'm about to level up, so I don't want to use it now. I'll use it after the Lance fight to get the maximum possible level for the champion. Lance's team starts off with a Gyarados, which I can easily one-shot with Thunderbolt. So that's a good start. Up next is his first Dragonair. This thing is terrifying in Pokemon Yellow because it has Thunder Wave. If it paralyzes you, this fight becomes much harder because then the next Dragonair can freeze you, the Aerodactyl can crit with Fly or Hyper Beam, the Dragonite has Blizzard, Fire Blast, Thunder, and Hyper Beam. All of that might sound really strange to you, especially if you play a lot of Pokemon Red and Blue. In those games, the Dragonairs both have the move Agility, and the Dragonite has Agility and Barrier. All of these moves are of course the Psychic type, and when the AI sees that the player is using a Poison type Pokemon, it will just spam them. As a result, with Muck, Weezing, and Arbok, fighting Lance in Pokemon Red and Blue is essentially going to be a free win as long as you can knock out the Gyarados and the Aerodactyl. And that brings me to the last point about Lance, because his Aerodactyl has a significantly worse moveset in Pokemon Red and Blue. So really on his team, the only thing you're worried about in those games is the Gyarados, which is up at the beginning of the fight, and of course Muck just one-shot it with Thunderbolt, so there isn't really a fear for Muck. However, today I've been paralyzed by the first Dragonair, which is so frustrating. However, I'm slightly thrown off and I make a misclick when using Mimic, so I copy Bubble Beam, which is obviously not what I wanted to do. I wanted Ice Beam for 4 times damage on the Dragonite. I can just use Thunderbolt on the Aerodactyl, but it just goes for Fly and doesn't give me a chance. So it would be really nice if I could one-shot the first Dragonair with Sludge to avoid Thunder Wave entirely. To do this, I can set up with Acid Armor on the Gyarados. You'll note here that it uses Hyper Beam, and I could have set up one more time. You might think that that would be the perfect strategy because my Muck currently has 169 speed, which is not nice because the Aerodactyl has 170 speed. However, if you look at my experience bar, you'll note that Muck is about to level up, and when it levels up, it's going to lose all of its badge boosts, so Aerodactyl is going to move first anyways, so using Acid Armor here would just be a wasted turn, which negatively impacts my real time. With the badge boosts, I make it past the first Dragonair with no Thunder Wave, and with that I can mimic Ice Beam on the second one, use it to knock it out, and move on to the Aerodactyl with green health. Also, I will note here that setting up with Acid Armor has an advantage because now the Aerodactyl will hit less hard. That is, unless it gets a critical hit, which it has a very high % chance of getting, but I can also just use moves like Hyper Beam or Fly and miss, which is what happens. I hit with Ice Beam and it goes down. So all that's left is Dragonite. I am going to do this because I'm faster. I hit with Ice Beam and it goes down. Muck has made it to the champion. This is where things get really brutal for poison types. The champion leads with a Sand Slash that knows Earthquake. He has AI modification 3, so it is only going to spam this move. Following the Sand Slash is an Alakazam that knows Psychic and Psybeam as well as Kinesis, just to make you really frustrated. Beyond that, we have Executor, which knows to use Hypnosis whenever you are awake, Magneton that can paralyze with Thunder Wave, Cloyster that can freeze with Ice Beam, and finally the Flareon is actually free because it is just going to spam Reflect. So it's nice after a gauntlet of 5 really tricky Pokemon to just have a free knockout. The strategy that I'm going here, by the way, is to use Acid Armor to set up my defense stat. By the way, you'll notice that my sprite disappears. That is actually the animation for Acid Armor. Coming from Japanese, the name of this move literally translates to Liquefy. So essentially, Acid Armor boosts your defense by making your Pokemon into a liquid. Now, Earthquake is only doing a quarter after 1 Acid Armor, which is really encouraging. Because it's doing so little damage, I figured that I could just mimic Earthquake right away. However, then Sand Slash gets a critical hit, and it knocks Muck out. By the way, there is roughly a 13% chance for that to happen. That means that the longer I stay in battle against the Sand Slash, the more chances I give it to get a critical hit with Earthquake, which will finish Muck off. In the next battle, I managed to set up and knock the Sand Slash out using Earthquake, but I only have orange health left over, and this is from 1 Acid Armor setup, which gives me an unfortunate speed. It is 1 less than the Alakazam. In this case, though, it chooses Kinesis, so it doesn't do damage, but it does lower my accuracy. There is an upside here, though, because I get a badge boost to my speed, move first, hitting Sludge, and Alakazam goes down. Alright, up next is the Trolley Grass-type Pokemon. I actually hate facing this thing, by the way. I miss Sludge, it misses Hypnosis. Then on the next turn it hits Hypnosis, but I wake up right away. Stomp does very little. By the way, this thing doesn't have any Psychic-type damage-dealing moves, so it's only going to hit me with Barrage or Stomp, which is not going to do very much. And because of my typing, it is never going to use Leech Seed. I hit Sludge, knocking it out in a single hit, and with that I'm moving on to the Magneton. Here, I have no idea what I was doing. I used Sludge on it and get paralyzed as a result. This is just a misplay. I definitely should have used Earthquake. It would have one hit for sure. As a result of my misplay, Cloyster uses Clamp, and that's a reset. Okay, but I can just adjust my strategy and make everything easier for myself. If I use 2 turns of Acid Armor before stealing Earthquake, then I will outspeed the Alakazam, which is obviously going to be the better play. I can 2-shot the Sand Slash with Earthquake and still move on with the same amount of health. From there, Earthquake knocks the Alakazam out. Then I can knock out the Executor with Sludge because my accuracy has no chance to be lowered. I can use Earthquake like I should have on the Magneton, finishing it off in a single hit. Of course, the Cloyster has low special, so Thunderbolt knocks it out. And with that, I have made it to the Flareon, the free Pokemon. I use Earthquake, finishing it off, and Muck clocks in. It gets a real time of 1 hour, 15 minutes and 47 seconds with 15 resets at level 70, and this was a game time of 4 hours and 27 minutes. Overall, I have to say, I was pretty disappointed with these results. I really wanted Muck to get a time that was close to an hour, hopefully under an hour, so being 15 minutes over that was just so disappointing. Because I was playing this run first, it also made me very fearful about the following 2 runs. Like, how are Weezing and Arbok going to do when they can't set up with Acid Armor against the Sand Slash? Well, let's go through Weezing's league and see. When compared with Muck against Lorelei, I think Weezing actually has a major advantage. That is the fact that it does not have Acid Armor. Without this move, it has a free move slot, and it can just use Rest. That way, when I mimic Amnesia from the Slowbro, if it is able to do any damage to me, I can always heal that damage, and then move on to the final 2 Pokemon. It's also worth remembering that Weezing has 20 more base special when compared with Muck, so Thunderbolt is also just going to hit harder. We can see that here because I almost one-shot the Dugong, and then the Cloyster is a very easy one-shot. At this point, with the amount of damage that I was dealing, I figured that it was maybe risky to try to mimic Amnesia because the Slowbro could use Psychic and get a critical hit. It could also just use Amnesia and then set up, use Psychic against me and knock me out. So in that case, the safer play might actually just be going for Thunderbolt right away. And in this case, it knocks the Slowbro out in a single hit. Against the Jinx, Sludge is physical, so I knock it out in a single hit. And then the last Lapras does survive, but Weezing can tank a hit, and with that, Lorelei is defeated. So Weezing had both a more flexible set and less turns overall in battle. But how is it going to do against Agatha? Well, here we can see another advantage that it has in terms of stat distribution. 10 more base speed means that I have an outspeed on all of her Pokemon. Just barely on the final Gengar by 3 points, but just 1 is good enough when it comes to speed, so this should be a lot easier. Plus, whenever she sends out Golbat or Arbok, I can always use Rest to heal. I really don't want to do this against the second 2 Ghosts, just because they have Dream Eater and it would be super effective. Also, the fact that my Thunderbolt is hitting slightly harder without setup does make up for a little bit of the setup that Muck was able to do. Still, with the substitute strategy, I don't even need to use Rest once, and I can just Thunderbolt her entire team down, taking an easy victory. Alright, so it is time for Lance. Now here I do want to mention something, which is Rest is not counterplay to Thunder Wave in Generation 1. Once your speed has been cut, even if you use Rest to remove the paralysis status condition, your speed stat will not be restored to its original value. So it is very lucky for me that Weezing gets a critical hit with Sludge, knocking the Dragonair out, preventing it from using Thunder Wave. Okay, so it's time to Mimic Ice Beam. With it, I one-shot the second Dragonair, move on to the Aerodactyl, which I easily tank its Hyper Beam, knocking it out in a single hit, and I sweep past the Dragonite to the champion. Alright, so will the Sandslash ruin everything for Weezing? And the answer in the first fight looks like a definitive yes. I have to rely on Sludge to knock this thing out, or I have to mimic Earthquake to hit it. Obviously, both of these moves are not particularly good against it, but Earthquake overall is going to be better. However, that means I am going to take damage every turn, and after just 2, I am on red health. So that is obviously not a viable path to victory. I need an alternative strategy. In this case, Weezing is going to make use of the Fire Blast TM, which I very rarely like to teach my Pokemon, just because it does have a 15% chance to miss. But in this case, a special move that has a secondary effect that can cause a burn is going to be very useful against the Sandslash. By the way, I want to note here that in Generation 1, Fire Blast has a 30% chance to burn the opposing Pokemon. In Generation 2, this was updated to be a 10% chance. And this has remained constant until modern times. Alright, so when I did my Coughing run, I originally tested this strategy with Fire Blast to see if it would work. However, Coughing wasn't able to put up enough damage against the Sandslash, so I'm hoping that Weezing's higher base stats are going to allow it to 2-hit. And in this case, I just miss with my first Fire Blast, so yeah, that's a reset. Also Sandslash crits. Frustrating. Then in the next battle, Fire Blast once again misses, so yeah, it's really frustrating. It finally hits on the next turn, doing massive damage to the Sandslash. Therefore, I can use the more reliable Sludge to knock it out. Now, one unfortunate thing here is that I'm level 69, which gives me 156 speed, so I am tied with the Alakazam. Alakazam wins the speed tie, uses Psychic, and Weezing goes down. Now, I might have been able to survive Alakazam's Psychic if I hadn't taken a free hit from the Sandslash. In the next battle, everything goes my way. My Fire Blast hits on turn 1, burns Sandslash, and I knock it out with Sludge. So, I have green health for the Alakazam. I win the speed tie, hitting Sludge, knocking it out in a single hit. Executor is next. This thing is very bulky. However, today I get a critical hit with Sludge, finishing it in a single turn. Magneton's next. I can't play around Thunder Wave in any way, but it goes for Thunderbolt, and I finish it very ironically with 2 Sludges. Granted, if it did have the Steel type, I could just use Fire Blast against it, so I'd probably be fine. Cloyster goes down to a single Thunderbolt, and Flareon, of course, is free. So, Weezing clocks in with its final time. When I saw this, I was absolutely stunned. It gets a real time of 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 54 seconds, with 7 resets at level 70. This was a game time of exactly 4 hours. Now, the reason I was so surprised is because Grimer really felt like the best first stage Pokemon out of the 3. By far, Coughing felt like the worst, so I assumed that Weezing would perform similarly. However, in my first playthrough, it dramatically outperformed Muck, so I was really curious how these two would play out with multiple attempts. I'm sure all of you are curious too, but first we have to see how Arbok deals with the League. It is by far the Pokemon that just wants to attack all the time. I have Earthquake, Rock Slide, Mega Drain, and Mimic, which I could use to steal Amnesia. However, in this case, I don't think that that's the right play. Being able to deal physical damage to the Jinx ensures that I'm able to one-hit it with Earthquake, and I can move on to the Lapras with very little issues. Here, I decided to go for Rock Slide, which does half, then the Lapras hits a Hydro Pump, and Arbok goes down. However, things can just be way luckier for Arbok. Like, check out this second fight. Dugong rests on the first turn, and then I knock it out with 2 hits. Cloisters next, I use Rock Slide, taking it to red with a critical hit. It does nothing to me because it misses, and I finish it off for free. Then the following Slowbro just spams Amnesia and gets knocked out with 3 hits from Earthquake. I one-hit the Jinx, move on to the Lapras, hit Rock Slide. Finally, she does damage to me with a Hydro Pump, but I survive with more than half health and polish it off. Okay, so here's the thing about Arbok against Agatha. It has access to a ground move, and there are no abilities in Generation 1. So I'm just going to be able to sweep her team. I knock the first Gengar out with a critical hit Earthquake, then I use Rock Slide on the Golbat, which doesn't one-hit, but Agatha just replaces its move with a Super Potion and I finish it off. I one-hit the Haunter, I one-hit the Arbok, and her final Gengar comes out. Now, I really want to draw attention to the play that I do here because it is truly one of the worst things I have ever done. I have no idea what happened. I am pretty sure that my finger just slipped because there is no reason to not use Earthquake. Instead, I go for Rock Slide, which of course does not knock the Gengar out. And yeah, as a result, Arbok goes down and I have a reset, which is truly painful. Like, this footage is actually so hard for me to watch. I am sure so many of you are going to be cringing at home. I am going to defend myself just a little bit. I played all of these first playthroughs in the exact same day, and Arbok was the last one. So at this point, I was pretty tired because I'm like 3 hours into playing the game. And if I was watching one of these videos, I would think 3 hours of playing Pokemon, that sounds really relaxing. Well, it's really not relaxing when you're trying to speedrun the game, and the game is running at 4 times speed. You have to make decisions extremely quickly, and one small momentary lapse of judgment or concentration can cause situations like this to happen. Still, this is just an inexcusable mistake. In the next battle, everything is right with the world. I easily sweep her team, and Arbok is moving on to Lance. One thing I want to draw your attention to is that Arbok is arriving here at a much lower level. It's only level 62, and as a result it might not have a nice champion battle like the other two. And this level also puts me in an unfortunate speed range for Lance. If I was like 3 or 4 levels higher, I would move first against the Aerodactyl. However, getting there is not that hard. I can 2-hit the Gyarados with Rock Slide, 1-hit the first Dragonair with Earthquake, steal Ice Beam, and then use this move to finish it off. Okay, time for the Aerodactyl. It is going to outspeed. It uses Wing Attack, getting a critical hit, taking Arbok to red health, and then my Ice Beam just barely does not knock it out. Alright, that is very frustrating. I might have to use my final 2 rare candies before this fight just to ensure that damage range. Next, Lance heals with a Hyper Potion. My follow-up Ice Beam does not knock the Aerodactyl out. It survives with even more health than last time. I really thought that I was going to have a roll there and would potentially knock it out, but apparently I was wrong. So it gets to attack again. It chooses Wing Attack, which is so lucky. In Generation 1, this is a 35 base power move. It takes Arbok to 12 hit points. I finish it with Ice Beam, use 4 times damage against the Dragonite, and I actually defeat Lance. I by no means had the right to win that fight, so I guess the RNG gods were feeling merciful after that terrible fight that I had against Agatha. To prepare for the champion fight, I teach Arbok Rest in the place of Mimic, and now we are ready to collect our final time. What I am banking on here is that at level 65, I will be able to 2-shot the Sandslash with Mega Drain. And yeah, that is not going to happen. The Sandslash survives with more than half health. Also, Earthquake does a devastating amount of damage in a single hit. Mega Drain is not able to heal enough to survive a second Earthquake, and as a result, I get my first reset. Okay, so I guess I need to do something different. I am not going to win with this strategy unless I get a critical hit, which is roughly 16% of the time. That does not seem like a good strategy. By the way, we have found some Pokemon where it just makes sense to crit the Sandslash and then move on with your life. Arbok, I don't think, is one of them. Instead, I am going to revert to the strategy that I used with Ekans. I find this so silly. I'm going to teach Arbok Fissure in the place of Mega Drain. I would have a 16% chance to knock the Sandslash out in 2 hits with Mega Drain, but now I have a 30% chance to knock the Sandslash out with 1 hit from Fissure. By the way, in Generation 1, it has a fixed 30% accuracy. The accuracy does not change based on the Pokemon's levels. I got lucky knocking it out on the first turn. I move on to the Alakazam, which I figured would be a 1-hit with Earthquake, but no, it just barely survives on red health. This is really not going well for Arbok. I hope the solution is not hit Fissure twice in a row to get to the Executor, and then maybe I have to Fissure it as well, just so that it doesn't use Hypnosis on me. This could be really awful. Luckily for me, the Alakazam goes for Psybeam, which does more than half, but Arbok does survive, so I can take it out. Alright, Executor, I'm gonna use Rock Slide. Hopefully it will miss Hypnosis. It does. I'm going to need what looks like 2 more hits from Rock Slide, so for now I'm going to heal with Rest to gain back some health. Then eventually it'll use bad moves like Barrage and Stomp. It won't do that much, and I can finish it off with Rock Slide. Along the way, it misses 1 more turn of Hypnosis, but I do take it out without it ever putting me to sleep, so that's really nice. Magneton's next, and of course, Earthquake does not one-hit it. It survives with a Sliver. However, I get lucky. It just misses Screech, and I finish it off for free. The game is giving Arbok a lot of concessions here. It really should be having more problems. I use Rock Slide against Cloyster. It doesn't do half. Why would it do half? Of course it's not going to do half. It uses Aurora Beam, very luckily not lowering my attack. It is a 33% chance. I use Rock Slide for a second time, and I get lucky, scoring a critical hit against the Cloyster, knocking it out, and Arbok can move on to the free Flareon. With that, it clocks in with a time of 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 40 seconds, with 9 resets at level 66. This is a game time of 3 hours and 54 minutes. The race between Weezing and Arbok in these first playthroughs was so close. Arbok only beat Weezing by 14 seconds. By far, Weezing has a faster early game. I think that they're probably about tied in the mid game. However, then throughout the league, Arbok is much better until it arrives at the champion, where it basically should have been walled, but in this case it got very lucky. Whereas with Weezing, it just kind of like makes its way through the mid game, arrives at the Elite Four, does pretty well against all of them, and then arrives at the champion and has the tools that it needs to win. Overall, after my first playthrough, I really felt like Weezing was going to win the race. It felt like the Pokemon that would just easily be the most consistent. Arbok I thought was going to take second place just because of how poorly Muck performed in the first run. I really had no hopes for this thing after its first playthrough. But that is the great thing about my methodology. It doesn't really matter how I feel about any Pokemon. Even after a first playthrough, I am going to do multiple playthroughs and see how fast each Pokemon can do. For these, I try to do as much research and planning as is possible. I try to challenge my own biases about strategy, and now I am starting to talk to the community as much as is possible to gain strategic insights from different perspectives. After all, despite me thinking that Rest and Hypnosis are always the solutions, that just isn't the case. Okay, so before we get into second playthroughs, let's look at some graphs to just do a brief analysis of these first runs. This is a timeline chart showing the splits for all of the Pokemon. So here you can see visually how much time each Pokemon took in each split. By the way, each one of the split segments ends as the Pokemon defeats that trainer. So for instance, all of the time in the Lance split starts after you beat the rival on Route 22, and then ends after you beat Lance. I think it's quite interesting that all the Pokemon defeated the champion in a very similar amount of time. Outside of that though, there was actually high variation. In some cases, Muck and Weezing are comparable, like for example, their Route 22 rival splits, whereas Arbok took much more time here. Once again, these two are more comparable with the Koga split. However, Muck and Arbok are more comparable with their Lieutenant Surge splits. That's just because Weezing defeated Misty as soon as it arrived in Cerulean City. Of course, there are some obvious places where a lot of time will be saved. For instance, the Koga splits with Muck and Weezing. There was a lot of bloat there because I didn't know how to do the fight, so I had some resets. Also, I think that Muck's Sabrina and Blaine splits are going to be easier on a second attempt. So now let's look at a real-time by trainer chart. I want to note here that if the graph goes down, it doesn't mean the Pokemon went back in time. It just means that the other Pokemon that I am comparing with did the splits in the opposite order. So here you can see that Weezing is taking on Misty first and then the rival after that. The interesting part of this graph, I think, is the fact that Muck is always behind the other two Pokemon. At no point does it take a time advantage. I think it's also very interesting to note that things start quite far apart between Weezing and Arbok. However, during the mid-game, Arbok really gains back a lot of time. And then by the end of the playthrough, they are neck and neck. Obviously, real-time includes some mistakes, so if we remove all of my mistakes, and also all of the things that the Pokemon struggled with, then we can see with a game time chart that Arbok is slightly faster than Weezing. I think it's now time to start with some follow-up playthroughs. So I'm going to start with Muck. This is actually the last playthrough that I did out of all of them. I waited until the very end when I had the most experience with it, just because it's the underdog. I did a total of 7 playthroughs with Muck, and we are watching the last one right now. The experience playing Muck gave me the insight that by far it feels the most consistent out of the 3. That being said, it's not all good because it is by far the slowest in the early game just because of its starting moveset. My route starts by taking me into Viridian Forest, where I fight the first and second bug catcher as well as the last by the entrance to the forest. After this, I deplete the rest of my PP and head back to Viridian City to heal. The reason I do things in this order is so that Muck is level 9, and then I can head out onto Route 22 where I face the rival. By defeating him here, he is now going to be set so that he chooses Jolteon as his final team, and this makes the rest of the playthrough far easier for Muck. The reason is that the Jolteon knows the move Pin Missile, which is super effective against poison types, so it's just going to spam this instead of using its more powerful moves like Thunder and Thunder Wave, and the fact that he evolves his starter into an electric type means that he does not put Magneton on his team, and yeah, if you know my videos, this Magneton is so good, so it's nice to not have to face it. After defeating the rival, I head back through the forest, completing the other trainers here, and then I grind until Muck is almost level 14. Following that, I defeat the junior trainer in Brock's gym, and this gives Muck level 14 to face Brock. I experimented with this fight going in at level 12 as well as level 13 to see if Muck could do this section of the game consistently slightly faster. Despite me really wanting a faster Brock split, unfortunately today I am not going to be able to get it, but there are 3 specific reasons why Muck has to do this fight at level 14. Number 1. If Muck is a lower level, then Geodude does 1 more damage per hit, meaning that Muck has less health when it arrives at the Onix. Number 2, when Muck is level 13, it deals 1 less damage per hit to Brock's Geodude, meaning that it takes even more damage before it knocks the Onix out. And number 3, when Muck is level 13, it only has a speed tie with Brock's Onix. That means every time he uses a move like Bind or Bide, things can get really bad. However, at level 14, I guarantee the outspeed as well as better damage ranges as I mentioned before, and that makes this fight much more consistent. Granted, it is still not a guaranteed win, but I wouldn't have proceeded with this playthrough if I had ended up getting a loss here. Now the reasons for Muck's slow start continue to pile up against it in the next section of the game, because all of my efforts now have to synergize towards beating the rival on Nugget Bridge. That fight's actually quite challenging just because of his Sandshrew. It takes Muck 3 hits to knock it out with Pound. As a result, I am going to train up in Mount Moon so that I get to level 20 before I face the rival. I'll note here that I'm saving before this fight. I will take a quick reset if the Sandshrew stacks up like 3 or 4 sand attacks, because then I'm just going to waste time and probably lose against the Eevee. But in this case, Sandshrew only gets a single sand attack, and I decided to take the rest of the fight, and I do manage to win. Now, it would be very consistent to go to the SSN first and then backtrack and face Misty, but with Muck, I don't need to do that just because I have so much health. Instead, I'm going to face her right after Nugget Bridge so that I can get the badge and then proceed and face Surge as fast as is possible. My strategy for the fight against Misty is yes, to use Bide. It is actually useful here. Because of Muck's HP, I'm going to survive hits from the Starmie and accumulate damage, and then I can knock it out very quickly. In this case, I do not get the 1 hit unfortunately, so I just finish it off with Pound, and with that I am moving on to Vermilion City. And this is where Muck finally gets its major accelerator, Body Slam. I'm also going to note here that I teach Rest just before I head into Surge's gym. This is not specifically for the battle against him, I'm just doing this while my inventory is open. Body Slam is more than enough to defeat his Raichu. I have a 97% chance to 2-hit, and the Raichu is only going to 2-hit Muck 35% of the time, and that is if it uses Thunderbolt 2 times in a row, so still, there have been no losses to Surge in this video. After this fight, I teach Muck Thunderbolt and I completely smash my way through Rock Tunnel. Rest provides me a consistent way to defeat the self-destructing hiker, and with that, I've arrived in the mid-game. Now I need to start doing some optional training with Muck, and I'm going to fight some trainers that normally I don't face. This Super Nerd with 3 of the Grimer and Muck line, very fitting. And then after him I face this Gambler who has 3 water types. They're very easy to knock out since I have access to Thunderbolt, and they give decent experience yields. I got the idea to face this second trainer from Ike the Killer. I worked with him during my optimization process on these 3 Pokemon. I am really finding it helpful to share ideas with someone else during this process, just so I'm not getting trapped in some of my own biases. After all, if I did this on my own, I might have just kept Rest until the very end of the game, and that is definitely not the best way to play Muck. I explore the hideout, grabbing the rare candy, and then in the department store I only buy 2 Carbos. Vitamins are overall not that important for Muck. Next I head into Erica's gym because by far, Muck feels the best equipped to deal with her. Once again, that is due to its enormous HP stat. I really feel like she can put me to sleep and then I can eventually just wake up and still win, even in the worst case scenarios. In here I fight a total of 4 optional trainers, the Beauty by the entrance, the Junior trainer by the cut tree on the right hand side of the gym, then the Lass and Cool trainer, which are both right in front of Erica. After that I fight her and defeat her on my first attempt. From there I head to Pokemon Tower. This area isn't really an issue for Muck. It could possibly have a reset against one of the Chandlers, but it's pretty unlikely just because Thunderbolt deals significant damage, and once again, Muck has a lot of HP. Once I've cleared this area, I'm going to talk about all of the trainers that I fight in the mid-game, and we're going to get very specific here. However, we're going to do it rapid fire. If you're curious about the reason I fought these specific trainers, it is because they have better experience yields than the alternative options. On the first route of Cycling Road, Route 16, I fight 1 trainer, this biker, and then on Route 17, which is the second part of Cycling Road, I fight a total of 7 trainers. This guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. After that, I head to Saffron City to continue my training where I fight all of the trainers in the fighting dojo. Then I head into Silph where I fight a total of 11 trainers. This brings Muck up to level 45, and that allows me to use 5 rare candies to get Muck to level 50 before I face the rival. I wanted to boost my level just so I can knock the Sandslash out as fast as is possible. At level 45, I have an 18.6% chance to knock it out in 2 turns, but at level 50, I have a 96% chance to knock it out in 2 turns. However, I accidentally used Sludge on the first turn, which is obviously not the correct choice. I got very lucky because it didn't use Sand Attack. From there, the remaining Pokemon are very easy. I want to note specifically the Kadabra's 84 speed. Using the rare candies also allowed Muck to move first against this thing, so it doesn't take any super effective damage. And I can move on to the Jolteon where yes, it is going to use Pin Missile, but no, this is not really a good move to choose against Muck. After clearing Silph, I always had to remind myself that I'm heading to Copycat's house next because I need to pick up the TM for Mimic. With it, I can face Koga and steal the first Venonat's Psychic. By the way, this strategy I got specifically from Ike the Killer, so thank you so much for bringing it to my attention that I should be doing this. I think that personally I would have missed this in my optimizations, and I would have tried to defeat Koga just using Sludge. By using Psychic, you can defeat Koga much easier at a lower level. Now I will note here that there is a loss condition, that is why I have 1 reset right now, and it occurs because when you mimic the first Venonat's Psychic, it is going to use Psychic against you because of his AI. Due to this, the Venonat has a 33% chance to lower Muck's special, and if it does, the rest of the fight is not going to be winnable. It is not worth playing out, so I just reset very quickly and try the fight again. Without a special drop, I have guaranteed 1 hits on all of the Venonats as well as outspeeds, so they're all free, which means I can make it to the Venomoth, sustaining only a tiny amount of damage. I am going to survive 2 hits from its Psychic. This allows me to use 2 of my own Psychics and knock it out. Now as I head towards Cinnabar Island, I'm going to fight 1 more trainer that Ike the Killer also showed me. It is this Fisher. By the way, a while ago I almost decided to replace this Fisher with Oak on my ROM so that I could conveniently face him every time I beat the League. I am really glad that I didn't do that, because if I had, I wouldn't be able to fight him, and his team gives exceptional experience. He has 3 Seeking and 1 Goldeen, and the total experience yield from this fight is over 3,600. Next is Pokemon Mansion. Here I pick up a Carbos. By the way, this one is very important. It boosts Muck's speed up to 106, which isn't relevant currently, because next I'm going to face Sabrina. Granted, having Koga's badge boost does allow me to move first against the Abra, but I am going to have to get lucky against both the Kadabra and the Alakazam. However, Sabrina's really not that good, so I get a first attempt victory. The experience from defeating her levels Muck up to 54, and now it has exactly 109 speed, which is relevant against Blaine. His Ninetales has 108 speed, which means I am moving first against it, and I can get set up with 1 turn of Harden before it attacks. The reason I'm using Harden here is to badge boost my speed, so that I'm going to move first against both the Rapidash and the Arcanine, making both of them slightly more consistent. That doesn't mean Muck has a guaranteed win here by any means. There are several loss conditions here. Ninetales can use Confusion, the Rapidash can use Growl, and then I'll have to use Thunderbolt to knock out Blaine's Pokemon, and finally the Arcanine could burn me or just do massive damage with its Fire-type moves. In this case, Muck hits itself against the Arcanine, and then it does enough damage that it's able to finish me off over the next few turns. So that's my second reset of the entire playthrough. I was pretty frustrated with it, and the frustration just continues because I have 2 more resets on Blaine, taking my total up to 4. That being said, let's remember my first playthrough results, which were quite dismal. At this current time, Muck is heading to Giovanni's gym under 50 minutes of time. Through my collaboration with Ike the Killer, we discovered that Muck can get a time under an hour, and in this specific playthrough, my goal was to get a time under 57 minutes and 30 seconds. After the bad luck at Blaine, which there was basically no way to account for, I still think that it is possible, as long as I don't get any unfortunate resets during the league. However, up first is Giovanni, and for this fight, I'm going to make sure that Muck is level 55 and then use 5 rare candies to boost it to level 60 where it can learn Acid Armor in the place of Harden. Out of the 3, Muck is by far my favorite to face Giovanni with, just because it has what feels like a legitimate strategy to use against him. Set up Acid Armor on the Doug trio so that physical moves do very little damage, then use Mimic to steal Earthquake, and this super effective damage can allow me to sweep his entire team. The only Pokemon that is likely going to survive is the Rhydon, roughly a 70% chance to survive there, but even when it attacks with its most powerful move, Earthquake, it does very little due to my Acid Armor, and I finish it off. The rival fight on Route 22 is quite easy for Muck. Once again, Jolteon is just so simple for this thing to knock out, so I'm proceeding to Victory Road, and here I want to set the stage for everyone so that you know what could possibly go wrong for Muck during the league. To do that, we need to watch some footage of one of my previous Muck runs, an unsuccessful Muck run. In this case, I defeat Lorelei quite easily. She's really not that much of a problem for Muck. Then I head into Bruno's chamber, and of course Bruno is completely trivial. He's one of the worst league members, so I fight him without saving, because that seemed very smart to me. Why would I waste time saving when he is just going to be an easy sweep? Making things even easier here for Muck is the fact that I can just set up with Acid Armor so his physical attackers do almost nothing to me. Also, I can Mimic Dig to deal massive damage to his Rock-type Pokemon. Yeah, and then the second Onix gets a critical hit with Earthquake. Luckily for me though, Muck survives with red health. Alright, that was almost Bruno's revenge. Machamp is next, Sludge does half, Bruno uses an X Defend like he is known to do, it's a terrible move. I do a little bit more damage, then he goes for Karate Chop, of course it crits, and yeah, Muck faints. So I have to reset and go back to Lorelei and fight her all over again. So apparently, Bruno was able to get his revenge. After I defeat Lorelei this time, I head back into his chamber. Why would I save? I'm not going to start saving just because I had one unlucky loss against Bruno. And as the fight played out, it became apparent to me that that was the right choice. I finish off the second Onix. This time it did not get a crit, and I have green health against the Machamp. Sludge does about half. Machamp uses Strength. Okay, so it's actually attacking. This gets a critical hit, doing a decent amount of damage to Muck. My next Sludge takes the Machamp to a sliver of health. It uses Strength again, gets a critical hit, and knocks Muck out for a second time. That meant that I had to reset and go back to the beginning of the Lorelei fight again. I believe that this is the only instance in my entire channel's history that Bruno has defeated me twice in a row. Like, he has beaten me before. Go check out Poliwrath vs. Hypno if you really want to see my shame. Anyways, it's not going to happen again, don't worry, but there is a chance for Muck to lose against him if things go very badly. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about that because I think it is absolutely hilarious, but the trainer that I'm really worried about is Agatha. The flaw here is just that her Haunter and her Gengar can both use Hypnosis on Muck, and that really does mess it up, because then the Gengar can use things like Dream Eater and Psychic. Also, once I clear Agatha, there is some inconsistency against the champion. I need to set up Acid Armor against the Sandslash. I do not have access to Rest because I used it earlier in the playthrough, and I also need to Mimic Earthquake for maximum damage against the rest of his team. What that means is I need to survive 5 uses of Earthquake. If the Sandslash gets a critical hit, Muck loses. And of course, in the playthrough where Bruno defeated me twice, yeah, the Sandslash gets critical hits and knocks Muck out, which is very frustrating. And at the end of all of this, Muck clocks in with a final time of 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 43 seconds, with 7 resets at level 68. This is a game time of 3 hours and 49 minutes. And that was my 6th playthrough with Muck. By the way, I really wanted it to be my last playthrough with Muck, but after that absolutely atrocious ending, I needed to come back and try it again. So let's resume the footage of my 7th playthrough and see how Lorelei goes. In this fight, things are really simple. Just damage the Dugong so that it uses Rest, set up with Acid Armor, and from there, you can sweep with Sludge and Thunderbolt. Also, I figured out that it is 100% a mistake to mimic Amnesia against the Slowbro. I would just be exposing myself to way too much risk. It is far better to set up on the Dugong and then just sweep. Now after the last playthrough, I decided to update my Bruno strategy. I do actually save in front of him just in case. However, this time I know how to play better. The solution is just not to set up to full. I only get +4, and from there I can sweep his entire team. Giving him more time to attack you with super effective moves is just not a good idea, and in this case I managed to defeat him on my first attempt. Alright Agatha, are you going to be kind and give Muck a good final time? After all, look at the clock, we are still under 55 minutes. A fantastic finish time is still possible. Unfortunately for me, in this fight I get paralyzed early on, and as a result the final Gengar is able to finish me off, which wastes a lot of time. In the next fight I once again get paralyzed, but this time it doesn't mess me up on the final Gengar, and I defeat Agatha. Now previously I didn't explain Lance, and he can win, but only if the Gyarados rolls good damage while I'm setting up with Acid Armor. Once I've got it, I'm going to one-hit the Dragonairs with Sludge, and one-hit the Aerodactyl as well as the Dragonite with Ice Beam. By the way, my experience is rooted out exactly so that I will not level up before the Aerodactyl, ensuring that I outspeed it to get the one-shot. However here, Lance gets a really lucky critical hit with Hydro Pump on turn 2, and it takes Muck down to 17 hit points. Now I get extremely lucky on the next turn because it chooses Leer instead of attacking me. Just because of that luck, I am able to use Thunderbolt and knock it out. However, I was pretty sure I was going to lose. The second Dragonair is going to knock me out with like Ice Beam, Bubble Beam, or Hyper Beam. I deeply considered pressing the reset button at this moment to just start the fight over and go for better luck. But for whatever reason, I just decided to tough it out. And then the second Dragonair uses Wrap, which does almost nothing, and it only gets a 2 turn, allowing me to finish the Dragonair off, finish the following Aerodactyl off for free, level up, but I am still faster than the Dragonite, and I can knock it out with Ice Beam. So that was an incredibly close Lance fight. Okay, look at the time, 57 minutes. Let's go into the fight against the champion and see what time Muck can earn. So the question is, will the Sandslash crit Muck while I try to set up? And the answer for this fight is that no, it will not. I get 2 Earthquakes off and Sandslash goes down. Now, because I have badge boosted myself, I am faster than the Alakazam, and Earthquake is going to one-hit it. So what could possibly go wrong from here? Well, I could misclick and accidentally select Acid Armor against the Executor and then get put to sleep by Hypnosis. I do have to mention that right here when I did that, I got like a huge jolt of adrenaline, and I felt terrible. However, Muck wakes up, I use Sludge, and Executor goes down. Thunderbolt one-hits the following Cloyster. I misclick once again using Sludge against the Ninetales. However, it does not use Fire Spin, so I finish it off. And then Earthquake one-hits Jolteon, and Muck clocks in with a final time of 58 minutes and 2 seconds, with 5 resets at level 67. This is a game time of 3 hours and 40 minutes. So now I'm going to bring up my tier list. If you have not yet seen Pinsir vs Scyther, which I released a couple of days ago, please go and watch that video first because I'm about to spoil both of their results. With its results today, Muck earns itself a spot in this C tier just behind Porygon and ahead of Fearow and Scyther. Just like Scyther, it really struggles in the early game because of the moves that it has available to it. If, for instance, Muck started with Sludge, I think that it could earn itself a spot in the B tier, but without it, it is stuck in the C tier. Even if I hadn't made the mistakes I made in the final fight of the last playthrough, and if I had had no resets throughout the entire run, Muck would not have been able to earn itself a spot in the B tier, so I was happy to take its 7th playthrough as its final result. And now that we have the Blob's final result, it's time to move back over to the Poisonous Air molecule and talk about the optimizations that we figured out for Weezing. It very much feels like the inversion of Muck. Muck is very consistent in the early game and then starts becoming more inconsistent by the time it reaches Blaine throughout the late game trainers. For Weezing, it's the opposite. The early game is very inconsistent, and then once Weezing gets to the mid game, things get so much more consistent for it. Now this might seem strange because Weezing does start with Sludge, and that is actually the reason that things are inconsistent in the early game. With access to a very powerful poison type move, Weezing has the ability to clear the early game incredibly fast. That being said, if I am going to take that route, there has to be some compromises made with consistency. The first one is that after I get the Pokedex, I'm going to head right to Route 22 to face the rival when Weezing is level 6. The loss condition here is if the Spearow uses Growl too many times so that I do pathetic damage to the Eevee. Then it can set up with Sand Attack and eventually knock Weezing out. Overall though, the odds are quite favorable here. Now the reason to do this fight right away, instead of doing it after doing some training in Viridian Forest like Muck did, is just because Weezing will never need to backtrack to Viridian City and bleed time that way. With Muck, I did experiment facing the rival earlier on like Weezing does, but in the end it just doesn't work out because Pound is not strong enough. In the forest, Weezing can train incredibly quickly because all of the bugs go down to a single hit from Sludge. After defeating all the trainer Pokemon, I am also going to grind against wild Pokemon to level Weezing up. Now there are a couple of different approaches to facing Brock. The riskiest and highest reward play is to face Brock at level 12, get very lucky, and in so doing push Weezing's time way down. Now I tried this strategy because I really wanted to get a full playthrough with it so that Weezing could have a fantastic final result. And I tried for it, believe me. I wasted 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon resetting to Brock over and over and over again without getting a single run that made it by him. Now it is possible to defeat him just because of how poison works with the full heals in the battle. However, since it was this inconsistent, I decided to go back to the drawing board and shore Weezing up a little bit more against him. What I came up with is going in at level 13 and leveling up to 14 during the fight. What this ensures is that I have the maximum possible health as well as the maximum possible damage against all of his Pokemon, and in this case I take a first attempt victory over Brock even though it was very close. Just like Muck, my goal for Weezing is to be level 20 by the time I'm facing the Cerulean City rival. This gives good damage ranges and sets up Weezing for success. Like Muck, I come back and face Misty right away. Sludge is more than enough to defeat her, so I don't have to rely on Bide this time. From there, I crush my way through the SSN, and I also face Surge, who by the way, gets very close to knocking Weezing out. He goes for Thunderbolt and it takes me down to red health, but yeah, still not enough. Surge loses, so no resets there. The next portion of the playthrough features one of my biggest disappointments in the Weezing run, and that is the fact that I cannot use Rest to defeat the self-destructing Hiker. What I have to rely on here is quarter damage from Sludge, as well as the fact that Weezing has enough bulk to survive self-destructs. This is by no means a guarantee, and you should really see that in this fight. It gets so close. Weezing tanks Graveler's self-destruct when it is on 26 hit points, and it survives with 3 hit points. That honestly could not have been closer. I was expecting to have one reset there, so in this case, Weezing is getting a very good time to this point in the run. Now, just like Muck, I'm going to start fighting optional trainers at this point in the game. I fight the Gambler with the Poliwhirl line, head into the hideout where I make a key mistake fighting the guy with 2 Machops. I was doing this because I was like, I'm going to pick up Double Edge and use that. I had just been playing Venonat the day before I was using Weezing, and yeah, Weezing cannot learn Double Edge, so this is just a tiny bit of wasted time. On Cycling Road, I fight 6 trainers, and then I head to the Fighting Dojo, defeating everyone here. In Silph, I fight a total of 10 trainers, which takes Weezing up to level 45. Just like Muck, I can then use 5 rare candies to boost it to level 50 before I take on the rival in Silph. This fight plays out a little bit differently because I'm going to use Smokescreen to lower the Sandslash's accuracy, just so it's less likely to hit Sand Attack. That is because here, with Weezing, I am required to knock it out using Sludge. I do not have Body Slam like Muck had. However, once the Sandslash goes down, I did get -1 accuracy in this case, but it doesn't end up mattering because the rest of the rival's team is quite simple for Weezing to finish off. I just want to note something quickly, which is there is one more possible use for Smokescreen in this playthrough against Giovanni's Nidoqueen. It can do a lot of damage with Tackle and Body Slam, especially if the former Rhyhorn has lowered your defense stat at all. I have specifically kept Tackle on my moveset just to knock this Pokemon out as quickly as possible so that it can't finish Weezing off. In Koga's gym, I mirror Weezing's route. By the way, I am fighting both of the optional trainers here with both of them. These 2 trainers give exceptional experience yields. After that, I continue to copy Weezing using the Psychic strategy against Koga, which is very consistent, giving me a first attempt victory. With this badge, Weezing's speed gets boosted to 119, making this the perfect time to face Sabrina because I move first against both the Abra and the Kadabra. Like I was saying, it's kind of the inversion. Weezing is becoming more consistent the further it gets into the game when compared with Muck. Now, Blaine is likely the exception to that rule because there is the possibility for Weezing to have a reset here. However, I really like its damage ranges. It has guaranteed 2 hits on the Ninetales as well as the Rapidash. Then against the Arcanine, it is going to 3 hit. I just barely survive on red health and finish it off, so still no resets for Weezing. In Giovanni's gym, I teach Mimic in the place of Smokescreen and Fire Blast in the place of Tackle. And then I train to level 56. This fight I expect to lose once because I'm going to need to knock the Dugtrio out over 2 turns, and it has moves like Fissure, Dig, and Earthquake. Also, I will just reset if it gets a Sand Attack off because I don't want to play out the rest of the fight missing so many of my own moves, especially when I'm using Fire Blast. The strategy here is knock out the Dugtrio, mimic Persian's Double Team, use Sludge to knock it out, and then Fire Blast to sweep his remaining ground types. There is the potential to bleed a lot of time here if he gets really lucky and the Rhydon hits with an Earthquake, but that doesn't happen today, so Weezing still only has 1 reset. Now with Muck, I showed you all the reasons that it could fail in the late game, but in this case we're going to go back in time to a former Weezing playthrough earlier on in the route, and I'm going to show you one of the most ridiculous resets I have ever had. Actually, it wasn't even a reset, I hadn't saved recently, so this was the entire run that I had to restart. In this case, I am defeating Lieutenant Surge, and here Weezing is left on low red health. However, I wanted to optimize this, and I wanted to go as fast as was possible. So after digging back to Cerulean City, I was just like, why would I heal? I'm gonna one-hit all of the Wrapping Lass's Pokemon with Sludge, so I do not need to worry about her. I can just proceed and heal right before Rock Tunnel. And then against the Wrapping Lass on turn 1, I get a Gen 1 miss on Sludge. She paralyzes me with the Oddish, while I do knock it out, and I knock out the next Bellsprout, and the next Oddish, and then at the final Bellsprout, yeah, everything falls apart and Weezing goes down, so that is a wrap for this playthrough. Okay, so with ridiculous losses out of the way, let's talk about the league. For Weezing, Lorelei is very easy. The fact that this thing has a higher special stat when compared to Muck really matters. I don't need setup, I don't even need to mimic Amnesia, I can just spam Thunderbolt and Sludge and defeat all of her Pokemon. Beyond that, there are no problems with Bruno, and then I move on to Agatha. Here, Weezing has another advantage because its moveset currently has Fire Blast and Thunderbolt, so I have a lot more damaging options against her Pokemon. That being said, it has all the same flaws that Muck has, so there's the potential for a reset here, but today it doesn't happen. After that is Lance. This fight is very different. I can knock out the Gyarados in one hit with Thunderbolt, but the first Dragonair could paralyze me. It doesn't today. I mimic Ice Beam and sweep the rest of his team. Okay, so Weezing has made it to the champion. Look at the time on the clock right now. If you had told me a year ago that Weezing was going to get this time, I would have laughed in your face. But after the last year of learning and a lot of help from Mike the Killer, we have got this thing's time down very low. However, there are some problems with the champion fight and I need to draw your attention to them. Note the fact that Weezing does not have enough speed to move first against the Alakazam. That is the reason that I am teaching Rest. And at this current level, Weezing does not have the ability to one-shot the Sandslash with Fire Blast, well, without a critical hit, that is. What that means is that Weezing has to tank an Earthquake, and then it has to tank a hit from Alakazam. I do have another advantage here, which is I could burn the Sandslash, take less damage from Earthquake, and then survive Alakazam's Psychic. By the way, this powerful special move is only doing 54 to 63% damage, so even if I take an Earthquake from the Sandslash, I could potentially survive it. With all of those factors, I'm going to 2-hit the Sandslash with Fire Blast, 1-hit the Alakazam with Sludge, and move on to the Executor. Because of his AI, this thing is going to use Hypnosis against me on the first turn, meaning I can use Rest, recover my hit points, wake up, and then use Sludge to knock it out over 2 turns. I have to get a little lucky there that it doesn't use Hypnosis and just knock me out with Stomp, but that's quite unlikely if I'm at full health. The following Cloyster is a one-hit with Thunderbolt. I'm easily able to take out the Ninetales over 2 turns. I do get confused here, but that doesn't really matter because the Jolteon is just going to spam Pin Missile, and I can knock it out with a single use of Sludge. And with that, Weezing clocks in with its final time of 53 minutes and 15 seconds, with 1 reset at level 69. This is a game time of 3 hours and 29 minutes. My thoughts on this finish are very simple. It's really nice. I am so happy with the results that I was able to get for Weezing. Of course, if I had 1 less reset, this would be a little bit less time, probably in the 52-minute range, but overall, I'm really happy with this result. Ike the Killer's best result with Weezing was also a 53-minute time, so this felt like a fair result to rank Weezing based on. Today, it earns itself a spot in the B tier, right behind Lickitung and right ahead of Ghastly. By the way, if you watched my Ghastly stream yesterday, I have not actually done that stream yet. I am recording the voiceover right now on October 24th, so that's why its results aren't updated. With these Weezing results, I was a little bit worried for Arbok. It might not be able to retain its first place position. That's because I was able to save a lot of time with Weezing, and for the majority of the game, it felt very consistent. So without further ado, let's jump into the final playthrough in this video and see how I was able to do with Arbok after optimizations. In my first run with it, I made a critical mistake, which was to give up on Wrap. While it is a weak normal type move that absolutely infuriated me as a kid because it just did not go fast enough, today for Arbok it is going to be the solution for so many problematic Pokemon. The first of these, of course, are the Pokemon on Brock's team. With Arbok, you only actually need to be level 9 to start this battle. Then, if you have enough experience, you will level up to level 10 during the fight to outspeed the Onix and simply wrap it to death. To speed things up and to ensure that I don't run out of power points, of course I'm going to use Leer to lower his Pokemon's defenses, and this gives Arbok a very fast Brock split, which is under 4.5 minutes. In Mount Moon, I do some additional training. This is specifically just so that Arbok levels up and learns Bite by the time I get to the end of the cave. What I found in some of my practice attempts was that Wrap was running out of power points before I defeated Jessie and James, and using Poison Sting to defeat their Ekans and Coughing is really not very fast. If I have enough experience to get Bite by this time in the cave, then there's no issue and I have no time delays before reaching Cerulean City. Now during the rival fight on Nugget Bridge, which we're going to watch now, I'm going to talk about how Rap really interacts with this playthrough. Where Muck was most consistent in the early game and Weezing was quite consistent in the late game, Arbok is sort of just inconsistent everywhere. In a fight like this, I am really relying on the fact that Rap is going to hit the sand shrew and not allow it to get a sand attack through. If that happens, the fight is going to be very annoying, but if it doesn't happen, I should be fine. And in this case, there's no sand attacks, so I make it to the Rattata unscathed. Now I could talk about every single battle where this matters, but just assume that in most of the battles, if I am using Rap, it is so that I am avoiding some other worst case scenario that Rap is going to help me prevent. Throughout the mid-game, I tried to use Rap as little as was possible to ensure that Arbok would have the most consistent results. Initially, I did attempt to route Arbok without using Rap, and while it is nice to have a more consistent approach, the reason that this overall did not work for its playthrough is just because of the champion. Getting back there is no good solution with the damage ranges available to defeat both the Sandslash as well as the Alakazam without taking major damage and ruining my chances for the rest of the fight. As a result, if I need Rap for that fight, then I might as well solve every other problem in the playthrough that I have with Rap, minimizing the number of total optional trainers that I have to fight throughout the rest of the playthrough, pushing Arbok's time down as low as it can go. Honestly, I think all of us are aware that trapping moves are absolutely broken in Generation 1, and today is actually the first time on the channel where I am unleashing their full potential. Now, notably against Misty, I am not going to be using Rap. I do not outspeed the Starmie at this point, so it is more consistent here to just go for Dig. Bite isn't an option because you can't flinch if you're slower, and going to the SSN to get Body Slam is going to waste too much time. Next is Surge, and he's basically the exact same scenario as Misty. There is the potential to have a reset here, but once again today, Surge causes no resets. Now, just inside the entrance to Rock Tunnel is the Bone Slow Pokemaniac, and he is a trainer where Rap really helps. Using it, you can whittle down the Q-Bone so that it has low enough health that you can knock it out with Body Slam, and then you can do the same thing against the Slowpoke, knocking it out too. Note here that I did miss a few Raps and took a lot of damage in the process. If I just attack straight up with Body Slam and Dig, the same scenario is going to play out, and there are more chances for them to roll for things like critical hits, as well as for Confusion to get its secondary effect, which is confusing your Pokemon, and that can really cause the fight to fall apart. In the previous two playthroughs, I bought some vitamins, some Carbos, and they didn't really matter that much, but for Arbok, they are absolutely critical because I need my speed to be perfect for certain fights to ensure that Rap can connect. In this case, I need exactly 3 Carbos. This is going to be very relevant later on, so hold on to the thought. In the first portion of the mid-game, Arbok's moveset is going to be Body Slam, Dig, Rock Slide, and Rap. With this set, I'm able to defeat Erica. By the way, I only fight one trainer in her gym, saving some time when compared to the other 2 playthroughs. After that, I make my way through Pokemon Tower onto Cycling Road, where I fight a total of 4 optional trainers, which is less than both of the other 2 poison types. Arriving at Silph, I continue fighting optional trainers, but I don't need as many here either. Once Arbok hits level 40, I am confident that I can fight the rival. Here I do want to note a funny fact. I have deleted Body Slam in favor of Earthquake. Having both Dig and Earthquake on my moveset is totally fine. I don't actually need Body Slam. Rock and Ground moves together provide perfect coverage against pretty much everything in the entire game. For this battle, I'm going to use Rap on the Sandslash as well as the Cloyster until they're at low health and then try and knock them out. Honestly, this didn't go very well for me. I played badly with my ranges and I do not knock the Sandslash out. That gave it a chance to use Sand Attack, which is the thing I am trying to avoid. But even with my bad play, Arbok is able to make it through here without any resets. After finishing Silph, I can go into Koga's gym and defeat the optional trainers here, gaining a lot of experience. This takes Arbok up to level 45, and as you can see now, it has more speed than all of Koga's Pokemon. There is an issue with this battle though, and that is the fact that Rock Slide is not going to knock out the Venonats. The first one it has an 86% chance to knock out, so I do take that damage range, but the next 2 are just far too unlikely. The first one is a 53% chance, and the second one is only a 20% chance. As a result, for both of them, I use Rap to chip them down, and then Rock Slide to finish them off. And if I've arrived at Venomoth with green health, I can just go for Rock Slide twice and knock it out in 2 hits, unless Arbok gets a crit and finishes it in a single turn, which is what happens here. Now as this fight ends, I want all of you to watch my speed stat. It is currently 107, and with Koga's badge, it gets boosted to 120, which means I outspeed all of Blaine's Pokemon, making him completely trivial. That is, if Rap hits when it needs to, and in this case, it doesn't. It misses, and Flamethrower knocks Arbok out. So that is my first reset. This could have come come at any moment in the playthrough, however I do find it very fitting since all three of these poison types really do struggle with this battle. With Blaine out of the way, I head into the fight with Sabrina. I'm doing this fight after Blaine so that I have the special boost here. I am not going to move first against the Alakazam, which is always annoying. In this case, it goes for Psychic right out of the gate and finishes Arbok. However, it can also just do nothing and let me finish it off for free, which is what happens in the next fight. The two mandatory trainers in Giovanni's gym level Arbok up to level 48, and to this point in the run I have saved a total of 10 rare candies, so I can use them now to take Arbok up to level 58. For this fight, I am once again going to rely on the Mimic double team strategy. There really isn't a way for Arbok to do this with just pure damage ranges, even though it learns the move Earthquake, which is super effective against 3 out of 5 of his Pokemon. For those of you that are curious, what level would Arbok need to one-shot the Rhydon? Well, if I want an 80% chance to one-shot it with Earthquake, Arbok would need to be level 83. I hope you can see that that is just not possible within the context of a speed run. While leveling up for Giovanni doesn't make any sense, I do need to gain 2 additional levels in Victory Road, just so that I'm level 61 by the time I enter Lorelei's chamber. These levels don't seem particularly relevant right now, but in a few minutes they will be. So I'm going to fight Lorelei with Arbok. This fight heavily relies on Wrap. I could use Rock Slide, but I really don't want the Dugong to lower my attack with Aurora Beam. Remember, it is not just spamming Rest in Pokemon Yellow. The Cloyster also potentially can cause a reset with a Freeze from Ice Beam. While I do prevent the Freeze, it does hit me twice, which means I only have Orange health left over for the Slowbro. Then Wrap misses, and Psychic hits, so Arbok has its 3rd reset here. However, in the next fight, Wrap cooperates. I make it all the way through the Jinx to the Lapras. I wrap it down to low health and finish it with Rock Slide. Of course, both Bruno as well as Agatha are trivial for Arbok, so let's move on to Lance. And here is where I need to draw your attention to my current speed stat. It is 169, which isn't very nice because Lance's Aerodactyl has 170. But I'm just going to use 1 rare candy before this fight to boost my level up to 64 and Arbok's speed up to 72. This fight is the reason that I fought those 2 additional trainers back in Victory Road. I'm going to be using Ice Beam on Aerodactyl for this fight, and it's not going to be a knockout. That means that Aerodactyl is going to get 1 hit in, and you can see here that it does a little bit of damage, but it could have done more if it had, say, used Fly or Hyper Beam. Not outspeeding there really exposes Arbok to a lot of risk, because then the Aerodactyl gets 2 chances to roll for a crit, as well as for a high damage dealing move. I should also mention that the Carbos that I used in the department store also allow for this outspeed, so they are incredibly important as well. With all of that planning, I'm able to defeat Lance on my first attempt, and at basically exactly 50 minutes, I am headed into the Champion's Chamber. I'll admit that this battle is a little bit annoying with Arbok. I'm going to have to use Wrap on the Sandslash to bring it down to low-ish health, and then I can finish it off with Earthquake. Next is Alakazam. I do outspeed it. I'm going to use Wrap because Earthquake is not a guaranteed 1-hit. After my first Wrap concludes, then I'll use Earthquake to finish it off. Next is Executor. To avoid Hypnosis wasting a lot of time, I am going to use Wrap, which I guess also wastes a lot of time, but at least I'm dealing damage and it isn't doing chip damage to me in return. Once it's on low health, I use Rock Slide. Unfortunately, it misses, but luckily Executor misses Hypnosis, and I take it out with my next turn. Next is Magneton. Now, despite Arbok having Earthquake and being a higher level, no, I will not one-hit this Pokemon. It's a bit ironic that ground moves do not knock this thing out in one hit in Generation 1, just because in Generation 2 it gets the Steel type, and no, even in Generation 3 it does not get the ability Levitate, despite what Magneton looks like. Anyways, using Wrap, I whittle it down and easily take it out with Earthquake. From there, the Wrap needs to continue against Cloyster. I take it down to under a 3rd health, finish it with Rock Slide, and then knock out the final Flareon with Earthquake. So, Arbok clocks in with a final time of 51 minutes and 22 seconds with 3 resets at level 66. This is a game time of 3 hours and 17 minutes. I hosted a poll on my channel to see what the community prediction was for this race, and after 14,600 votes, Arbok emerged with 41% of the total votes cast. So well done for anyone who predicted that this would be the best poison type in this video. However, the poll was actually very close. In second place was Muck with 39% of the votes, and Muck really did not perform well. I do agree with everyone who voted for Muck though, that would have been my personal vote. Of course, in a distant 3rd place in the poll was Weezing with 20% of the overall results, so this thing was really impressive today. I really hope that it surprised a lot of you in the way that it surprised me. So in the end, Arbok wins both the poll and the race. But where do its results earn it a placement in my tier list? Well, it is a little bit slower than Flareon's most recent time, and it is faster than Lickitung's most recent time. So today, it earns itself the second spot in the B tier. So now we have official rankings for all the 2-stage mono poison types. I think if I went back 2 years in time, I would be quite surprised at how fast these Pokemon can beat the game. Still, when compared with all of the other fully evolved Pokemon, their results are not particularly good. You might look at a Pokemon like Gyarados and say, why isn't it ranked higher in the tier list? And it starts with only Tackle, so that's the majority of the reason, but the other half is that it has a slow growth rate. I also think that as years go by and I do repeated attempts with all of these Pokemon, Arbok, Weezing, and Muk's results will start to look even worse. However, maybe I missed something. If you think there is a more consistent way to play that also saves time, please let me know in the comments. I am always eager to learn more about these games and present better results for all of you each time I release a new video. Before I close things out here, I want to do some data analysis on these final playthroughs so we can get a sense for how they all stacked up against each other in even more detail. To start things off, let's look at the splits bar charts. So here we can see that the Arbok playthrough is by far the fastest, with Weezing being in second place and Muk being in a distant third place. The thing that's interesting here is comparing how the final results are staggered and then comparing how the Brock splits are staggered. As should be very clear to everyone, Arbok completely dominates in the Brock split, and I think overall that is the thing that gives it the biggest advantage throughout this entire run. When compared with Arbok, Weezing loses a little bit of time in the Erica split, whereas Muk loses a little bit of time in the Rival 5 split. Outside of that, most of the other splits are fairly similar. However, I do want to draw attention to the fact that Weezing's Lance split, which essentially counts all the time from after the rival before the league is defeated until Lance is defeated, this split is significantly faster than the other two. I think the reason there is that Muk is relying on a setup move like Acid Armor, and Arbok is relying on a slow move like Wrap, whereas Weezing just has good damage output and it basically just constantly attacks. If only there was a way to get Weezing through Brock a little bit faster, it would by far be the best out of these 3 Pokemon. Now just before I move on from this graph, I do want to note the fact that I am comparing Arbok 5 with Muk and Weezing 7. Yes, I did not do a 6th and 7th playthrough with Arbok. I felt that the 5th playthrough was very representative of the time that it should be getting in the game, and the result I got was also very comparable with Ike the Killer's best result, so we sort of felt like we had figured Arbok out. Plus, if I went into it and did 2 more playthroughs, I do think that those might just get worse results, because the RNG was pretty good in this 5th playthrough. Okay, so now let's look at real time by trainer. You can see by this graph that all of the Pokemon sort of fit nicely into their own little band. None of them ever actually take the lead away from the Pokemon that is ahead of them and then lose the lead later on. Do note here I did not go back in time if the slope of the graph is negative. That just means the splits were played in a different order during that playthrough. If we switch this graph to the game time graph, please look very closely. Yes, I did change the graph. They look almost identical because when you are playing well, real time and game time are essentially analogs for each other. There's a lot of nuance to that statement, like time bleed due to the multiple of game speed you are playing on, and I don't have time to go into that right now. After all, this has already been a very long video. So let's move on to the next graph, which is levels by trainer. And this one is probably the most interesting graph that we have looked at so far. Here you can see for a large portion of the playthrough, both Muk and Weezing are at the exact same level at every major battle, whereas Arbok is able to consistently get through those battles at a slightly lower level. By far the most interesting spot in this graph is definitely the Blaine, Giovanni, Rival 6, and Lorelei splits, where all of their levels dramatically change based on their unique needs for that playthrough. For example, Muk's graph starts quite high and then goes up even more with some rare candies, just because it needs Acid Armor before Giovanni, whereas Arbok just spikes up in levels because it has saved a bunch of rare candies to that point in the run. It's worth noting there that Arbok could have defeated Giovanni at a lower level, however I didn't really like that approach. Like, why not just be a higher level, especially if I'm going to end the game at the level that I want to be at. I do find the end of this graph very interesting because Muk and Arbok are most similar in terms of level at finish, whereas Weezing is higher than both of them. However, despite these extra levels, Weezing's time is much more comparable to Arbok. My analysis there is that Weezing can spend time training because Arbok is using Wrap and wasting time doing chip damage over and over and over. As a result, the real times are fairly similar, whereas the levels suggest that there should be a larger difference. Okay, so that is it. I hope you enjoyed the Monster Mash. Have an absolutely fantastic Halloween. If you support me on Patreon or through YouTube memberships, thank you so much. It means the world to me. And now, before we finish the video, just because the credits are quite long, let's see how each one of these Pokemon does against Professor Oak. I know a lot of people find my channel through these versus videos, so I'm going to explain how I'm fighting Professor Oak. If you didn't already know, this is a battle, like a team that is programmed into the ROM. Professor Oak has 3 teams, each one with one of the final starter Pokemon, so either Venusaur, Blastoise, or Charizard. However, these fights are not accessible through regular gameplay. You can use a glitch to cause yourself to fight Professor Oak, but in this case, I've just modified my ROM so that 3 Oaks are standing inside of Blue's house in Pallet Town. I can just go in there after I've defeated the League, talk to whichever one I want, and fight him. In this case, we're starting off with Arbok. I try to fight the Professor Oak that I think is going to be the most difficult, so in this case I went with Blastoise, since Arbok doesn't have any super effective damage against it. As has been the case up until now with Arbok, the strategy is obviously just spam Wrap, hopefully knock out his Pokemon and move on to the next one. One thing to mention about his team is that all of the moves are assigned based on what that Pokemon would know by level up by that point in the game. This is how all the movesets were assigned in Pokemon Red and Blue. Starting in Pokemon Yellow, they started defining some custom movesets which made a lot of Pokemon much better. For example, Lance's Dragonite or Lorelei's Slowbro. That is why the Exeggutor only has Barrage, Hypnosis, and Stomp, an absolutely trash moveset for a level 67 Pokemon. I finished off, move on to the Arcanine. I decided to chip it down with Wrap and figured that Earthquake would do enough, but it actually doesn't. The Arcanine survives on a sliver. However, this thing also has a terrible moveset, so I finish it off for free. Next is Blastoise. I chip away at it, finish it off, and move on to the Gyarados. Again, chip away, use Rock Slide, and win. So that concludes my Professor Oak fight with Arbok. By the way, I did have to reset that fight 3 times, so this was the 4th attempt. The losses all came about just because of bad Wrap RNG. So now, let's move on to our 2nd place finisher and see how Weezing does against Professor Oak. There isn't really an Oak team that Weezing is going to be weak against. It has Fire Blast for the Venusaur and then Thunderbolt for both the Charizard as well as the Blastoise. In the end, I decided to face the Charizard team. I think probably in retrospect, the Blastoise team would be a little bit better. When I do make it to the Charizard, it just goes for Rage against me. One of the worst possible Generation 1 moves to use with a Charizard that is level 69. Definitely not a nice play, Oak. I finish it off, move on to his final Gyarados, and one-shot it with Thunderbolt. So only our 3rd place Pokemon remains. Let's see how Muck does. And it's actually going to be really good against Oak because the Tauros has a trash moveset. Actually, like all of his Pokemon. None of these Pokemon actually have acceptable moves. The Gyarados is probably the best of the 5. It has the same moveset that Lance's Gyarados has. I think if they removed Leer for a move like Surf, then this thing would be very strong. But other than that, his team is pretty trash, so the Tauros has Tail Whip, Leer, Rage, and Takedown. Because I have Acid Armor, I can just set up getting all of the badge boosts I want. Additionally, whenever the Tauros goes for Leer or Tail Whip, it's just gonna badge boost me even more. And because I can always outpace the defense drops with Acid Armor, that means that both Rage and Takedown are gonna do almost nothing against Weezing unless it gets a crit. And even when it does, the damage is not that bad. I finish the Tauros off, one-shot the following Exeggutor. Arcanine does survive, but it goes for Roar. Big brain move right there. I knock it out, move on to the Blastoise. Thunderbolt just barely does not knock it out, however, it just goes for Withdraw. And with that, I finish Oak off with a final Thunderbolt. In the final 2 cases of Weezing and Muck, they were both able to defeat Oak on their first attempts. I really hope that this video was a fun ride. I had a blast making it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.